Chapter 1842. It felt like a dynasty before the Celestial Empire, where it was normal for rich families to give their concubines away. Interestingly, the moment Kai Zi said this, one of the four heavenly kings beside him, the astrologer Caponia, became anxious. She stared at Kai Zi anxiously, and then felt that it was inappropriate, so she secretly tugged on Kai Zi's sleeve. Kai Zi seemed to have come to his senses and wanted to change his words, but he did not dare to open his mouth and slap himself in the face. Duque wanted to laugh at the sight of the young couple. Duque looked like he was about to snatch someone's wife. Alright, I think Caponia is not bad. When Duque said Caponia's name, Kai Zi and Caponia felt completely disheartened, as if there was nothing left for them to live for. Kai Zi immediately reacted. Back then, because he lacked courage, he had knelt in front of his great lich father, who had sought refuge with the Calamity Army. This time, he was not going to be timid anymore. He was going to say, "No," loudly. Without paying attention to the second half of Duke's words, Kai Zi's body suddenly burst into flames and his whole body jumped up. Yes, he really jumped up. He was at least 5 to 6 centimeters off the ground. Wait, Caponia can't do it. When Kai Zi roared out loud, he felt as if a great river had burst its banks, and he could finally vent all the depression in his heart. Boo! I did it! Caponia, I did it! Although I might not be able to step into the demigod realm for the rest of my life, at least I'm safe. Something's wrong. Kai Zi was already prepared to face Duque's thunderous rage. After all, he was the one who went back on his word. But why was Duque smiling evilly, his blood elf followers shocked, and Caponia a little angry? Kale? That was dumbfounded. Duque leaned against the back of the sofa in satisfaction. He waved his hand, and Vashch came over to massage his back. Du Muk repeated his words with a poisonous tongue that was bubbling up. Thieves. What do you mean by that? Just now, I said, I think Caponia is not bad, why don't I bestow her as your wife? Then you actually said, wait. Not Caponia. Are you saying that you don't like Caponia and want to offer her to me as a maid to warm my bed? No, of course not. Actually, I like Caponia. Kai finally admitted shamefully. Duque's explanation of the cause and effect was so infuriating that several guys, including the four heavenly kings, were already snickering. At this time, how could Kai Zi not know that he was played by Duque? He thought that Duque, who was obsessed with elves, wouldn't die so easily and would let Caponia go. Subconsciously, he thought that his little lover had been sent away because of his slip of the tongue. In the end, he was the one who fell into Duque's trap. Kai Zi's face immediately turned red, and he scratched his head in distress, not knowing what to say. But now that he had said it, Kyle felt a sense of relief. Okay, tell me, how did you get together with her? Since his master had given the order, even if it was a little embarrassing, Kai Zi could only confess. Kai Zi and Caponia's relationship seemed to be a natural one. Ever since Kai Zi became a great trader to the elves, his four advisors had never abandoned him. He didn't have many capable female mages around him. Originally, there was the great astrologer Solarian. In order to help Kai Zi out, Solarian had volunteered to serve Duque. In a sense, this was also an opportunity. Duque had more or less put in more effort to help Kai Zi wash away the stigma of being a traitor. But this way, Kai Zi would only be left with Caponia. It was easy to feel lonely away from home. In the long night, if he wasn't looking for someone to talk to, he would sink into loneliness. Back then, the four advisors were naturally the ones that Kai Zi talked to the most. Was it easier to talk to a few men, or was it easier to talk to a girl who was kind and understanding? As time went by, Caponia succeeded in getting the position. To be honest, if Duke was given a choice when he first arrived in Azeroth, he would probably choose the elves. Even Caponia might not be the best choice. Since he already had the famous 3 Windrunner sisters, why would he need other high elves? Just having the 3 Windrunner sisters was equivalent to having all the girls in the high elves. Not to mention Caponia, even Duque hadn't touched Solarian, who was a maid. Du Mok wasn't a stud, so why would he lower himself to F***ck a girl who was a level lower? So, not only did Duque bless Kai Zi and Caponia, He also gave Kai Zi a 10% share of the land of fire elements. Here's your AO. I think the surrounding environment will be very suitable for you and your phoenix. Duque opened the 3D map of the land of fire and seemed to have given Kai Zi a piece of land. Kai Zi didn't see it at first, but when he saw it clearly, he immediately thanked him profusely. How could that place not be suitable? It turned out that it was the territory of Alyssa Razor, who had betrayed the alliance and turned from a green dragon to a fire hawk. As a place to cultivate a pure-blooded fire hawk, it was also quite suitable to cultivate a phoenix. It could be foreseen that as long as Kai Zi displayed his talent and completely combined his power with his phoenixes, he would soon become a demigod of fire. After sending Kai Zi and the others away, Duque returned to the study and began to think while enjoying Vashch's verbal service. He thought that he should have accumulated enough capital to embark on the path of a true mage god after obtaining the control of all the elements in the water and fire elemental realms. The reason why Duque gave out his share so generously was that Duque had determined through the system elf that even if he took out 100% of the elements, including all the ice and fire elements in the elemental realm and the entire Azeroth, it still wouldn't be enough. To be specific, it wasn't a problem of quantity, but a serious lack of quality. What was annoying was that this was like a puzzle. If one piece was missing, he could still find out which piece was missing. But now, it felt like at least half of it was missing. The rest that could be judged was like broken glass, all in strange shapes that people couldn't make heads or tails of. So, at this time, a comfortable feeling came. After a while, Vashch raised her head. Master, what are you thinking about? Nothing, I'm just thinking about how I can become a true god. Everyone has improved, but I've been stuck at demigod for so long. Vashch laughed. How could it be so easy? Before the ancient war, the white deer god Malorn had been stuck at the demigod realm for tens of thousands of years, but he still couldn't ascend. Let nature take its course. Duque was stunned. He thought about it and agreed. This kind of thing couldn't be rushed or forced. Then let nature take its course. Chapter 1843. Duque looked into the distance. With the help of the magician's eyes, he could see the situation near Oldham thousands of miles away. Servanas was a very proud man deep down in his bones. Without Duque, perhaps she would still be an arrogant elf in this life even if she did not become the undead queen. It was because she was venting her dissatisfaction at Duque while blowing Duque's pillow talk that Duque could not do anything to her. When you peek at my battle, it makes me feel that you don't trust me. If you stay in the shadow behind me every time, ready to support me at any time, it will make me feel very useless. Before leaving to fight against AO Trash, Queen Sylvanas said this to Duque in a half-complaining tone. Duque really could not do anything to Queen Sylvanas. Some women were willing to give up everything without reservation. Some women always wanted to keep their own territory so that they could have a breathing space. Queen Sylvanas' independence and the pride that appeared from time to time was more like her trademark, even to the extent that it was already a part of her soul. Sometimes she would bring trouble to Duque, and sometimes she would surprise Duque. This always made Duque love and hate. Duque did not dare to directly look into the wind god's throne. Unlike the great Screw Laga who only realized that the enemy was right in front of him, whether it was AO Trash or Queen Sylvanas, those who played with the wind element were extremely sensitive. As long as Duque dared to inject his arcane elements into the wind god's throne, the two big bosses would definitely find out immediately. It was fine if Al-Akir found out. Anyway, Duque did not intend to let this guy live, but Queen Sylvanas? If he did not handle it well, there would be turmoil in the harem. Speaking of which, Queen Sylvanas was pregnant with Duque's child. A pregnant mother could not be provoked. Duque could only bitterly use the most secretive method to set up a batch of passive sensing tactics for the wind element. There was no way. Duque did no magic of the 6 major elements, but among the 3 elements of nature, holy, and shadow, Duque was the weakest in nature. Not to mention that the nature element included wind, thunder, and other branches. In front of the real demigod of wind, he was just an amateur. Fortunately, Duque also had his own unique skills. He could roughly judge the current situation of the battle based on the flow and proportion of the wind elements. Oh, We've already passed the Wind Council? Duque was a little surprised. The Wind Council was one of the 4 heavenly kings under Al-Aikir. As the Lord of South Wind, Siamat, was imprisoned by the Nephesite, one of the 3 major tribes of Oldham, Al-Aikir's deputies eagerly wanted to fill the power vacuum that appeared in the Wind Council. The remaining 3 members of the council were Anshul, the Lord of West Wind, who could heal his allies or poison his enemies with wind; Loash, the Lord of East Wind, who could grind the grandest mountains into dust with his wind; and Nishil, the Lord of North Wind, who had lost more lives than the other 3 combined. Doesn't it sound like the 3 counselors are pretty awesome? In reality, that was all there was to it. After all, the equipment dropped by the Wind Council was not that great. When Duque was still a player, the so-called random enchantment that dropped equipment caused many of his team members to bleed profusely. What really deserved Duque's attention was the change in the proportion of the wind elements. Duque sensitively discovered that the proportion of elements in the wind elemental realm had changed. In addition to Queen Sylvanas, who had already interfered, there were 2 more share controllers. They had a very similar but different aura to Queen Sylvanas. Duque almost immediately recognized that it was the aura of Aurelia and Sasha. Duque's heart leaped with joy. Territories needed to be managed, and blindly plundering and squeezing was not advisable. Obtaining enough elements also meant paying the corresponding responsibility. Just like how Duque chose Vashj as the representative of the water elemental realm and made Kaizi a trusted aide of the fire elemental realm. In the end, Queen Sylvanas still chose her sisters as her deputies. Of course, this made Duque feel gratified. At the same time, it also meant that Aurelia and Sasha also had the ability to hurt Aikir. Feeling the intense and frenzied movement of the wind elements, Duque could totally imagine how fierce the battle in the Wind God's throne was. In fact, it was just as Duque imagined. After beating up the 3 idiots of the Wind Council, Queen Sylvanas used a small trick to deceive Al-Aikir and did not immediately discover that the council was completely annihilated. This allowed Queen Sylvanas to recuperate and let her sisters come over to absorb the power and element share of the 2 Wind Lords. When the 3 sisters were done, Al-Aikir, who felt that something was wrong, appeared. His figure was similar to Ragnaros. The huge amount of elements in his body made him extremely huge. His height alone was more than 10 stories high. The length and volume of his lower body were immeasurable because his lower body was a few layers of tornadoes that rotated clockwise or counterclockwise. The decoration on his upper body was a little ridiculous. Al-Aikir had a purple bun that looked like a Hindustani. The purple bandage-like band covered almost his entire face. Only 2 flashing purple lights could be seen, which could be considered his eyes. The main parts of his body were covered with thick platinum armor. On the left and right shoulder plates, there were 2 flashing electric balls that emitted the power of violent thunder suspended in the air. Wrapped in purple silk ribbons with gold edges was a pair of pure wind elemental arms. Seeing Queen Sylvanas and her sisters, Al-Aikir raised his arms angrily. Greedy and shameless mortals, not only do you want to step into the divine realm, but you also covet my throne and my power? Queen Sylvanas responded with contempt. You dare to collude with Enzoth in order to obtain the rule of the entire Azeroth. Have you never thought that there would be a day when you would be counterattacked? I really admire your naivety. If the word naivety was used to describe a little girl, it would be a compliment. To describe a lord of elements who had lived for tens of thousands of years, it would be utter contempt. Queen Sylvanas easily provoked Al-Aikir's anger. The wind element was not a good-tempered fellow. Aikir was not as irascible as Lager, but he was not far behind. Al-Aikir would not be nice to a thief like Queen Sylvanas who wanted to seize the throne. Queen, let me help you. Gavinrad waved his wind sword and slashed at Al-Aikir. Al-Aikir suddenly flew into a rage. Son? Bastard human. Shameless human. How dare you use my son's power to attack me? Gust of wind. At first, Gavinrad did not understand why Aikir suddenly changed his target when he wanted to kill Queen Sylvanas first. But when he heard Al-Aikir's angry roar, he realized that he was the one who caused trouble. Chapter 1844. Gavin Rad had been playing with the wind sword for a long time. It was so long ago that Kieran had forgotten that Thunder Wrath, Wind Seeker's blessed sword, actually sealed Prince Thundrin's soul inside the sword and kept extracting the prince's power, hence the special effect of the wind sword. It wasn't his fault that he had forgotten. After all, this was one of the earliest divine weapons of the Alliance of Heroes. Who was Prince Thundrin? Wasn't it just Al, Akir's son? Using the power of his son's smash to slash his father didn't need to say anything. Gavin Rad, who had never had enough aggro and was often not a good MT, pulled the aggro very well this time. What? Defensive knights were only good at pulling group monsters and not tanking the boss because they didn't have enough aggro? That was impossible. At least not this time. At this moment, whether it was the bitter comrade Gavin Rad or Sirvanna's, they both understood Dumuk's sinister intentions. Duque had promised not to interfere with Queen Sylvanas' threats and promises. Now it seemed that he wasn't just interfering, he was practically sticking his hands and feet into it. As a demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas' physical attributes weren't greatly enhanced, at least in terms of vitality. Compared to her speed, magic, and attack power, her vitality wasn't even worth mentioning. It could be said that if Queen Sylvanas was hit hard by Akir, she might not die, but Duque's unborn child might be finished. In a life-and-death battle of this level, how could Queen Sylvanas reduce her chances of getting hurt to zero? This wasn't a game where there was a main tank and defensive warrior to take most of the damage from the boss. In reality, bosses weren't stupid. They all had brains and wouldn't be affected by aggro-pulling skills like taunt or armor break. The boss would attack someone purely because they were a greater threat to him. Of course, there was one exception, and that was the true meaning of ridicule. Queen Sylvanas was here to seize power, so she would at most be considered an attempted crime. What about Gavin Rad? He had witnesses and material evidence and could be directly convicted. Every bit of power in the wind sword in his hand came from the soul of Prince Thundrin, who was sealed in the sword. The prince's soul led the gathering of wind elements, which resulted in the wind sword's special effect. It could be said that every time Gavin Rad swung the wind sword, it was as if the prince's soul was wailing. The whispers in other people's ears became terrible lines in Al Akir's ears. The following content is purely a free translation of the distorted version. If there are any similarities, it is purely coincidental. Yamit. Papa, save me. So painful, sob sob sob. These voices sounded like they had been smashed by a grass mud horse 10,000 times, so Gavin Rad was completely enraged. A powerful move sent Gavin Rad flying into the sky. Well, it was like a home run, flying out in one go. Above his head was a boundless azure sky. Beneath his feet was a boundless blue ocean. Gavin Rad wasn't skydiving, he was skydiving. Gavin Rad had never been afraid of anyone. Even if the two commanders of the Burning Legion were here, he would still dare to fight back. The premise was to keep his feet firmly planted on the ground. Had this guy ever been sent flying into the air and then completely freefall? Wah! Gavin Rad was so scared that he almost *T himself. Help! I'm going to die. Not only that, Akir's hatred was not appeased. His huge wind elemental hands pushed out continuously. Cut, 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 cut. It was a continuous stream of lightning arrows that were like Gatling guns. Streaks of long lightning radiance really looked like the tracer bullets of a machine gun, drawing out dazzling arcs of light in the bright sky. This was the aura that Gavin Rad wouldn't stop until he was beaten to a pulp. Paladins were supposed to be a symbol of courage. Seeing this guy dancing and screaming, Queen Sylvanas was both amused and annoyed. She waved her hand, and the wind element that belonged to her instantly rolled out. Gavin Rad felt like he was riding on the clouds. He made a big circle and actually flew back to the platform of the wind god throne. With the support of the demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas, Gavin Rad, who did not learn from his mistakes, shouted, "Let me tell you, this Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Wind Seeker, represents Prince Thundrin's blessing to me, Bullsh *T. The trash was enraged again. This time, it was the ice storm that was like a Category 12 hurricane. The violent tornado swept up thousands of white clouds and gathered in extreme chill. It crashed violently into Gavin Rad, the enemy who killed his son. F*CK%yen #at. Before Gavin Rad could finish cursing, he was sent flying again. Air was the medium for transmitting sound. If the air became an irregular turbulence, then the transmission of sound would be impossible. The second half of Gavin Rad's curse was eaten up by the ice storm. Queen Sylvanas and Gavin Rad weren't the only ones who came to attack Al-Akir. The others held back their laughter and attacked Al-Akir, who didn't care about anything. This was especially so for Aurelia and Sasha. Every arrow that the sisters shot out would leave holes of various sizes on Al-Akir's body. If Trash was a human, they would have shot out bloody holes one after another on his body. It could be said that because Al-Akir attacked Gavin Rad crazily, everyone had a stable environment to attack and output. This time, Gavin Rad, who was sent flying, became a large ice block the size of a wardrobe. Through the bumpy surface of the ice, he could see that this guy had been sent flying with his arms and legs wide open. But in the next second, the ice block was crushed by Queen Sylvanas with a gust of wind. Gavin Rad, whose lips were purple from the cold, was sent back by the wind. Gavin Rad was furious too. He raised his wind sword and shouted, "Ha! I, Gavin Rad, am back. Let me tell you, I am the unkillable cockroach that Duque mentioned. Although I don't know what a cockroach is." Before he could finish his words, he was sent flying again. No wind, no ice. This time, it was lightning. Aura, 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 aura. The violent lightning strike was launched from Al-Trash's hands. Even though Gavin Rad had activated Holy Shield, the powerful natural elemental attack still broke through his Holy Light Shield. If it wasn't for Sally Whitemane's powerful healing spell, at the last moment, he might have already died. Even so, there was still an unknown object that looked like a burnt corn or a dark paladin flying through the sky. Queen Sylvanas, I'll call you Queen Sylvanas just like Duque. Can we make a deal? Don't send me back. Gavin Rad was about to cry. Sylvanas said seriously, "Winds return." A minute later, "No. I admit defeat. Please don't send me back. Wind return. I'm really going to die." A certain paladin was furious. Wind return. Chapter 1845. Anger was a double-edged sword. It could give people strength and explosive power, but it could also make people lose their rationality and judgment. Akir was not human, but he also had emotions, and that was enough. Gavin Rad was the poisonous bait that Duque had set up to feed to Al-Trash. Regardless of whether Al-Trash ate this poisonous bait, it would greatly distract him. Unless it was an existence without emotions, as long as it was an intelligent creature, it would be difficult for it to remain indifferent to the enemy who killed its children. Holy Knights were famous for being able to fight and take damage. Even though Gavin Rad seemed a little weak. As one of the remaining 5 Silver Saints, he had escaped the shackles of fate and escaped the fate of death from Arthas. After going through so many battles, his vitality and endurance were infinitely close to the demigod realm. With the support of so many healers and the storm armor that Queen Sylvanas secretly gave him, it was difficult for him to die even if he wanted to. It was just a little hard for him to keep getting beaten up. In fact, when Al-Akir chased after him, he had already accepted his fate. It was just that he would not feel good if he did not curse out loud. When Al-Akir woke up from his anger, it was already a little too late. The attackers led by the 3 Windrunner sisters and the Storm Warden Amarin took advantage of the time when he was beating Gavin Rad to quietly deplete 75% of his wind element. Elemental creatures did not have a specific pain system. Only damage that directly pierced the soul would cause them to be alert. However, the high-purity wind element that belonged to Al-Akir was actually his life force. With 3/4 of his life force gone, Al-Akir finally woke up. "You treacherous thieves! Wild wind, listen to my command, go with the wind, little bugs." Following Al-Akir's domineering declaration, an unprecedented storm swept through the sky. It was a terrifying storm that could cut rocks into pieces and pulverize bricks into gravel. Not only was there frost, but there was also terrifying lightning that danced like snakes. Amarin created a tornado that was independent of Al-Akir's power to protect everyone. The people were saved, but the platform that carried the Wind Council's Wind Lords suddenly collapsed. Many Alliance heroes screamed, especially heroines. It was easy to feel weak if one's feet were not firmly planted on the ground. The sudden feeling of weightlessness was torturous. For example, Sally was the one who shouted the loudest. From the Molten Core until now, Sally was an old member of the Alliance's hero squad. From a little girl to a slender and elegant young lady, Sally could be said to be a veteran. Unfortunately, some things just couldn't get used to, so she was the one who screamed the loudest. "Miss Sally, please stop screaming." Hajaron Mingyee couldn't take it anymore. "In theory, Her Majesty the Windrunner Queen will save us soon. Of course, I have the slow fall spell. Why, is Miss Whitemane going to become a mage?" Milhouse made a suggestion that was out of place. In fact, in the next second, Queen Sylvanas shouted. The eye of the storm, the stones that were supposed to fall rapidly due to gravity began to spin strangely in the air, trembling. Some of the tiny gravel even flew higher into the sky in defiance of gravity. Every mortal who was falling suddenly felt that there was something under their feet. With just a thought, the wind around their bodies all listened to their commands, moving them up, down, left, right, back and forth. Everyone, including Storm Watcher Amarin, realized that they could actually fly, and their speed was 300% of their normal movement speed. "This is the eye of the storm?" Amarin was a little shocked. "Ha, I can fly." Riadaline was very happy. "That's amazing." Solon and Leander were in awe. If not for the fact that they were facing a strong enemy, everyone would definitely enjoy the feeling of flying freely. "Gavinrad, where are you going?" "I suddenly remembered that I have something urgent to do," a certain paladin said with a sobbing voice. Queen Sylvanas smirked, and with a wave of her hand, she grabbed Mr. Gavinrad, who was trying to slip away and fly as far as he could. In fact, Queen Sylvanas' actions were a little redundant. Audiobook, who had woken up, was already suppressing his own unhappiness. He ignored the little bug Gavinrad and focused on dealing with her. Only Queen Sylvanas could shake the source of his power. Lightning, lightning wand, lightning cloud, static shock. Audiobook used a series of lightning attacks from the wind elemental branch to beat the hero team into a sorry state. The attack speed of lightning was faster than the wind, and it was also harder to defend against. In order to avoid injury, Queen Sylvanas had to focus more and summon lightning to intercept Audiobook's lightning. Unknowingly, it had become a battle of attrition. As an attacker fighting in the enemy's formation, this was quite disadvantageous to Queen Sylvanas. After all, in the Wind God's throne, there were more wind elementals that listened to Audiobook's orders. If this continued, Queen Sylvanas would not be able to outlast Audiobook. At this time, Aurelia and Sasha stepped forward. It had to be said that the female elf's thinking was a little strange. Before they had children, they always wanted to have a child. Therefore, the two sisters were not willing to risk their lives until the last moment. But after giving birth, the two sisters were even fiercer than the fiercest Queen Sylvanas. At this moment, they completely let go of their souls and forcefully plundered the share of the wind elemental here. They did not even let go of Queen Sylvanas' share. If it were someone else, Queen Sylvanas might have turned hostile. Sisters were sisters, and there was nothing that they could not share. Seeing that she could not attack, Queen Sylvanas decisively gave up most of her wind elemental and transferred it to her sisters. In an instant, the situation of the battle changed. It felt as if there were 4 demigods surrounding and attacking Audiobook. It suddenly became Queen Sylvanas defending, while Aurelia, Sasha, and Amalron were attacking. This kind of chaotic attack made Audiobook at a loss. He was furious. He kept summoning wind, rain, thunder, and lightning to attack his enemies in various forms. But he was the best example of 2 fists being unable to fight against 4 hands. The wind elemental that had gathered on his body was rapidly being sliced off inch by inch. It was a high-speed nibbling that could be seen with the naked eye. When the two dazzling balls of lightning on his shoulder armor became dim, the great lord of the wind elemental world, Aulakar, was dead. Feeling the elemental authority surging toward her from all directions in the wind elemental world, Queen Sylvanas was overflowing with dominance and waved her hand. Everyone realized that many black spots were rising under their feet. Countless stone fragments that had fallen not long ago were rising against gravity. Thousands of stones gathered together, forming a huge floating island with a diameter of nearly 1 kilometer. Queen Sylvanas stood in the center of the floating island and announced loudly, "I announce. I, Sylvanas Windrunner, am the new lord of the wind elemental world." Chapter 1846. The voice of the elemental world attached to Azeroth could only be heard by the elemental world and elemental creatures in the same situation. For example, the various large and small elemental creatures in the land of fire and tidal throne that had been subdued. From Vashj and Kale, that's who stood at the top of the elemental world, to the second brothers like Majordomo and Caratheras, to the pitiful Smoldron and Neptulin who could have been big bosses but were now just third brothers, and to the elemental creatures of various levels. Those who were truly ambitious had all kinds of thoughts. Neptulin and Smoldron, who originally had some thoughts, immediately gave up on the rebellious thoughts. The situation was very clear now. Duke Marcus was aiming for the position of the Lord of the Four Elements. The fire, water, and wind realms were all under Duke's control. Then, needless to say, it was the Earth elemental world's turn. Not long ago, when Neptulin saw the fire and wind realms enter Azeroth first, he was prepared to wait and see. Now, it seemed like he was simply sending himself to his death. In addition, the powerhouses closely related to the elements could also receive the news. The guardians of Mount Hyjal and the Ring of the Earth, which were dedicated to quelling the anger of the elements, were all dumbfounded. Especially the Ring of the Earth. Originally, Hamuir and the others were still holding meetings day and night to discuss how to coax the various elemental masters so that they would not come out to cause trouble and return to their respective elemental worlds. Great, now they're all fucking traitors jumping over loyal officials. As long as the 3 elemental world masters gave an order, it would immediately turn into the 3 elemental worlds ganging up on the Earth elemental world. The druids in the Ring of the Earth suddenly felt as if they had learned the way of nature for nothing. They were learning harmony and communication. On the other side, Duke was taking the way of the king. He directly used his fists to get rid of the troublemakers and subdue the troublemakers. When he became the boss, all the turmoil would be quelled. To put it more exaggeratedly, if Duke wanted to play a specific game, he could give a strict order. Other than the local neutral elemental creatures in Azeroth, the shamans would not be able to use any water, fire, or wind elements. There were no shamans in the alliance. When the news spread that Queen Sindorii conquered the wind god throne and became the queen of the wind elemental world, the whole kingdom of Sindorii rejoiced. Almost all the elves ran to the streets to celebrate, singing and dancing. It didn't matter if Queen Sylvanas was Duke's wife or not. In any case, not only did Queen Sylvanas become a semigod, she had also become the queen of an entire world. Even the mage faction in the country had begun to discuss whether or not they should develop wind magic on a large scale. After all, their queen was practically the goddess of wind. It would be a waste not to use such a good resource. The Alliance's Duke controlled the water and fire elemental realms, appointed Kale, and Vashj as overseers, while Sylvanas controlled the wind elemental realm. Even though Die-Hard Roar had a big heart, he still felt that it was a little unbearable. It was true that the beast men played the berserker style, but while they revered the warrior class, the shaman's teachings were the true tradition. Shaman priests were not only respected professionals, but also the core of the tribe's military. Earth, water, fire, and wind, these 4 elements would be hard to bear, not to mention losing 3 of them at once. Without the water element, there would be no healing magic. Without fire, there would be no AoE attacks. Without wind, just think about it, the legendary Wind Fury 9 consecutive strikes of the earliest shamans. Without wind, there would be no use. Once the shaman profession went up against the Alliance, it would immediately be useless. Die-hard roar fell into a rare long silence. On the other side, Duque had rushed to New Silver Moon City to welcome the triumphant return of Queen Sylvanas and her party as half a master. Before he could hug his 3 lovers for a long time, Gavin Rad rushed out like lightning and hugged Duque tightly. Duque's eyes were filled with the charred armor that this guy was wearing. Duque, I'm going to die. I don't want to live anymore. Back then, I blocked a knife for you, I withstood Lager's hammer for you, and now I've withstood 100 lightning strikes for your fiancé. My life is so bitter. Sob, sob, sob. I'm old, maybe I won't make it soon. It would be strange if I really can't carry the leader. It was worth mentioning that Gavin Rad's acting was terrible. After howling for a long time, he couldn't even bear to use a few drops of eye drops. It was just a few lines over and over again. What he meant was, I've shed blood and tears for you, Boss Duque. Don't call me when you're fighting bosses in the future, and remember to call me when you're picking up cheap loot. Duque's facial muscles were stiff. He pretended to comfort Gavin Rad. Why don't I let you retire with honor like Mograine? I'll convince your wife to accept your women and illegitimate children outside. For my sake, your wife won't say anything. Gavin Rad's face instantly turned pale. He immediately stood up and thumped his chest armor. He decisively expressed his loyalty. Actually, I'm not even 50 yet. I think I can still fight for another 15 years. That was what he said, but his sorrowful eyes gave Duque goosebumps. Queen Sylvanas's cold voice came from behind him. The wind elemental realm will give you 1%. Gavin Rad immediately continued to howl. Boss, I've shed blood for you, 3%. Forget it if you don't want it. Her Majesty Sylvanas finally gave her verdict. I suddenly remembered that I have other important things to do. I won't stand in the way of your reunion, boss. Gavin Rad, who had gotten the benefits, left immediately. Queen Sylvanas was indifferent, but she actually uttered a classic line. Men, she flicked her long blonde hair gently. That disdainful look, that aura with its own background music, that arrogant demeanor, she was simply invincible. Did she become arrogant after taking control of the wind elemental realm? Duque bared his teeth, a little depressed. He had suppressed Queen Sylvanas a while ago. Why did she seem to be gaining momentum recently? In any case, he was the father of the child in her belly, and he was her public fiancé. It wasn't too much to give her a public hug, right? Faced with Duque, who opened his arms, Queen Sylvanas still hugged him. It was a warm hug as usual, but she whispered in Duque's ear, I'm angry. You put Gavin Rad in my team because you don't believe in my ability. Well, I really, forget it. Since you're going to be a father, you're so worried about us. I'll let you pass this time. After that, Queen Sylvanas secretly breathed in Duque's ear. Tonight, from behind, wow, that's a lot of information. You already know it's a daughter? Why is it a daughter again? By the way, are all demigods so awesome? You already know now? And from behind, Duque snickered. Chapter 1847. As the saying goes, a daughter is a father's lover in his previous life. A good daughter is very considerate. She might even say, I don't want to get married, I want to stay with my father forever. It's sweet to think about it. Son. Damn you. You'll know what differential treatment is when you have a son. If you accidentally press on a woman's hair, she'll yell at you. When that fat boy is born, he'll snatch away your special dumpling. His mother won't say anything even if he pulls and bites you. If you talk louder and disturb the son, you'll be sentenced to death. No matter how much trouble the son makes, he'll be acquitted. He'll say, if you run away, there'll be a man in the future. According to Queen Sylvanas's character, she'll cut you with a knife the next moment. It's definitely a good thing that she's pregnant. In the future, she'll inherit her mother's beauty, just like Aurelia and Sasha's daughter. Just like Enilus and Atlanta, they'll definitely be as beautiful as their mother when they grow up. In theory, they have different surnames. But are they the new Windrunner sisters? That night, Duque was a little annoyed. In the past, when he caught Queen Sylvanas, he'd occasionally say, "If you're so awesome, why don't you go to heaven?" Well, this time, Queen Sylvanas was ready. She even had an oars pose. Just as Duque was about to swing his sword and mount her, she really flew. She stuck to the ceiling of the bedroom and refused to come down. "What do you mean by flying above my head?" Duque was angry. "I'm scared." The fearless Queen Sylvanas actually had this kind of moment. This time, it was Duque's turn to be annoyed. If Aurelia and Sasha hadn't become traitors and flown up to the bedroom to catch Queen Sylvanas, he didn't know what would have happened. After half a night, the three Windrunner sisters were finally dealt with. Facing Queen Sylvanas, who was pretending to be a corpse, Duque punched her but hard. "I shouldn't have spoiled you so much and let you be the demigod of wind. Now you're making trouble for me." Queen Sylvanas couldn't keep up the act and turned around. "Then what do you want? Take back my demigod status?" "No, I'm just asking, when will your pursuit of power end?" Duque's question made Sylvanas stare blankly for a moment, and then, a little discouraged, I actually didn't think about it. All right, I admit that I'm just unsatisfied. I can do whatever you think you can do. I just want to prove to the world that I, Sylvanas Windrunner, can still be strong and live a wonderful life without you, Duque." Without beating around the bush, Queen Sylvanas spoke her mind. At this time, Aurelia got up and touched her sister's nose. Even if you don't want to admit defeat, you should at least have a plan. You went to fight El Akir while you were pregnant, and you still dare to complain that Duque stuffed Gavinrad in as insurance. The Windrunner family doesn't have such an ungrateful woman. Queen Sylvie knew that she had gone overboard after being scolded by her elder sister. She lowered her head and said, "I'm sorry, elder sister. Sorry." Now that Queen Sylvanas had admitted defeat, Duque wasn't interested in scolding her anymore. "Right, Duque, what about you? How far do you want to pursue power?" Sasha came out of the blanket and asked with her head in her hand. "If I can defeat the Burning Legion with my current strength, it doesn't matter if I don't strengthen myself. I don't actually pursue power. I just want to protect the people and things that I cherish. That's why I'm working so hard." Duque was telling the truth. Duque started to tell the three sisters about his journey in life. At first, he just didn't want to be turned into a ghoul. Because he was afraid, he cherished it. In order to protect everything he had, he worked hard. The more he had, the more he couldn't bear to part with it. Unknowingly, he did more and better. It sounded a little ridiculous, but it was actually very simple. This kind of thinking and practice that extended from the small self to the big self, and even the whole world, was much easier to accept than those exaggerated big principles and big hero ideas. As time passed, the three sisters were stunned to find that their man had become an existence that the mortals in the entire world of Azeroth had to look up to. "All right, I promise you, Duque, and I promise elder sister and third sister. After I destroy Nethereo this time, I'll give birth to the child and be a good queen of Sin Dorii. I'll no longer pursue the power that might lead to my destruction. In fact, I don't see any chance of advancement." Perhaps the last sentence was the key to Queen Sylvanas' words. So what? This time, although the Alliance showed great power and suppressed 3 elemental realms in one go. This time, although the Alliance showed great power and pacified 3 elemental realms in one go, the 3 elemental realms weren't as powerful as before. In fact, the price paid by the Alliance was not small at all. At a high level, controlling the 3 major elemental realms was a huge gain. Duque expanded the weave and announced that even the mana consumption of frost elementals would be reduced by half permanently, which won the unanimous cheers and praise of the Pharaoh. For the middle and lower levels of the Alliance, the consumption was not small at all. The aftermath of the cataclysm had not subsided at all. That's right, the withdrawal of the rioting water, fire, and wind elemental creatures only prevented the disaster from further expanding. However, the damage caused by the previous earthquake had not been pacified. For example, the large-scale flood in the wetlands, the handling of the fissures in the Elven Forest, the Western Wilderness, Stranglethorn Vale, and other places, the expansion of the disaster had to be controlled first, then disaster relief, and then resumption of production and construction. Only when a new batch of food and products was produced could society be considered to be on the right track. Before that, to put it bluntly, they could only rely on the existing resources to survive. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 3 to 5 years to restore the productivity before the cataclysm. This was especially true for food. No matter how much food was stored before, without new rice and wheat harvests, the people would still be muttering in their hearts. However, no one could compare to Duque, who had a wild imagination. There were now many new members in the factory of Iron Stove Castle. A dwarven blacksmith said in the common language, "We need to quench this thing. We need to maintain that temperature for about 5 minutes. Before this piece of steel deforms and cracks, we need to cool it quickly in water, which is water quenching." Do you understand what I mean? A fire demon next to him understood and turned to a fire elemental with an inverted triangular body behind him. Then the fire elemental got to work. When the steel was heated and kept warm for a time, Naga, who was standing next to him, waved her hand. A water elemental came over and directly wrapped the piece of steel with its body. *Z, cooldown complete. Chapter 1848. At first, not just elemental creatures, even the dwarves couldn't adapt. This completely subverted their common sense of technology. Blast furnace? Boiler? No need. Water source? Cooling water? No need either. After mastering water, fire, and wind, the first invention Duque made was a brand new elemental industrial system. The furnace castle itself was a volcanic crater. The fire elementals used up the fire elementals, just went into the lava and came back. The water elementals weren't afraid either. Outside of the furnace castle was a snowy mountain. The fire demons and Naga that Duque controlled became the most important bridge between mortals and elemental creatures. Wind elementals, also known as air elementals, also played an important role in the Alliance's industrial system. In the largest wind tunnel laboratory in the furnace castle, in the past, they relied on diesel engines to pull the propellers to provide the wind needed for experiments. Now, it was the air elementals that blew the wind. The experimenters could get as much wind as they wanted with just a word. The wind speed could be adjusted at will, even at different angles. In time, the Alliance's third-generation flying battleship would probably come out. It would be a hybrid flying battleship with a combination of traditional diesel propellers and wind elementals. Not only did it ensure safety, but it also took into account the new technology. The key was that it consumed less energy and had a better endurance. Not just industrial, but in agriculture, the addition of elemental creatures quickly subverted the image of elemental creatures in the eyes of civilians. The Alliance's propaganda was like this. In the past, the cruel elemental kings Ragnaros and Al-Akir controlled them to wreak havoc on the continent. Now that Duque became the king of water and fire elementals, the situation was reversed. In Loch Moden and the wetlands, this was originally the dwarves' largest food production base. Because of the collapse of the Boulder Dam, a large area of the wetlands was submerged, and Loch Moden began to lack water. Under normal circumstances, this year's food production in Loch Moden would be finished. But with water elementals, things were different. High-level water elemental elites were mobile medium-sized reservoirs. The dwarves commanded the Naga, and the Naga commanded the water elementals. Once they were controlled, not only did they open up a new water source in Loch Moden, in fact, the underground water that the dwarves didn't discover or couldn't handle before, they also rearranged the layout of the paddy fields in Loch Moden. In the wetlands, a group of muddy water elementals with sand and mud would run into a big puddle and squat. Water leads the way, sand and mud are left behind. It didn't matter how big the puddle was or whether there were dangerous creatures such as crocodiles in it. It turned into pieces of soft mud that were rich in water. At the very least, with a little tidying up, transporting some soil over, and then using a bulldozer to flatten it, it would immediately become a piece of fertile farmland. As long as Neltharion was settled and the Boulder Dam was rebuilt with cement, the wetlands would become a major grain-producing province in less than 2 years. It would be thousands of miles of fertile land that belonged to the dwarves. Not only the dwarves' territory, but the entire alliance's territory, from the northernmost Sin-Dorii kingdom all the way to the south, to Lordaeron, Stromgarde, Alterac, Gilnis, Dalagen, Stormwind, and finally Kurtiras, who had started building a new royal city in Stranglethorn Vale, were using the opportunity of the cataclysm to transform the landscape and carry out more scientific redevelopment of the land. Apart from the Night Elves who had always adhered to the doctrine of nature, all the races and kingdoms of the Alliance used this opportunity to reform themselves. At the throne meeting, someone asked, "Isn't there still Nesario who hasn't come out? What should we do if he attacks?" Duque said straightforwardly, "The reason why the cataclysm is called a cataclysm is that it was not something that could be done by Nesario or Zoth alone. This is a special effect produced by the combination of the four major elemental realms and Azeroth. Without the four major elemental realms working together to pull the elements of the world to resonate together, the destruction of the planet would have been impossible." "What if Nesario attacks?" Muradin looked a little cautious. "Our hero squad and the Sleeping Dragon Temple will join forces to fight the attack immediately. Also, can a black dragon destroy nearly 10 million square miles of land at the same time?" As soon as Duque said this, everyone suddenly understood. Azeroth was very large. Duque had just said square miles, which was the way the Chinese were used to. The total territory of the Alliance was about 20 to 30 million square kilometers. This was not bragging. The Elven Forest alone was 1,300 kilometers from east to west, and the widest part was more than 400 kilometers, with a total area of 330,000 square kilometers. Plus the Reedridge Mountains, the Western Wilderness, the Twilight Forest, the Upwind Path, the Swamp of Sorrows, and half of Stranglethorn Vale. Today, Stormwind alone had more than 2 million square kilometers of territory. The specific figures could not be calculated because no detailed geological survey had been done. The 7 human kingdoms, the territory of the 3 Hammer Dwarves, Nomarigan, the Night Elves Danasuska, and a small half of Kalendor, the Blood Elves Sin-Dorii, the Dreenei's Blue Mystic Island, and the enclaves of Northrend. One had to know that apart from the Dragonbone Waste and the Northwind Taiga, Northrend was basically the territory of the Alliance. The ratio of square miles to square kilometers was 1:58. 20 million square kilometers might be considered small. It was a pity that the Alliance now only had a population of more than 10 million. Even if the ice fields, mountains, and wastelands were excluded, it was still a typical case of vast land but sparsely populated. The leaders of the Throne Conference could see that Duque was now a classic case of grasping the big and letting go of the small. As long as the overall situation was one, the losses of small places did not affect the overall situation. It could be foreseen that the places attacked by Nesario and his Twilight Dragons would definitely suffer losses. Under the surveillance of the magic net all over the world, once the densely populated areas of all the member states of the Alliance were attacked, they would definitely respond immediately. With Duque, a demigod of the magic net who was proficient in teleportation, it was completely possible to make the attackers suffer the consequences. Perhaps even their lives would be spared. Since the damage caused by the attack to the Alliance was limited, the Alliance could take advantage of the opportunity of the cataclysm, forcing the residents to migrate and carry out a comprehensive development. As long as the population, productivity, and resource development went up, even if some people died, it would still be a big gain in the overall situation. Jaina smiled. "I'm impressed. You can turn a world-destroying cataclysm into an opportunity to promote the development of the Alliance in one go. Is this the so-called elemental economy?" Jaina did not know that the term she had casually mentioned had actually set off a craze among economists and historians about the topic of elemental creatures promoting the development of science and technology. While he shifted his attention back to the internal affairs, Duke did not forget about the ongoing war. Through the Eridar Gemini, Duque learned a new piece of information. "What? You're saying that the Horde didn't run into the Twilight Dragons Varian, Cenarion, and Sinestra when they attacked Twilight Fortress?" Chapter 1849. Recently, Gemini had been sent to the Horde by Duque. Duque subconsciously believed that the rest of the Twilight Hammer was already in Xatha's territory. If they were to enter a real cult with an evil god as a backdrop, Gemini would be defeated in no time. Duke didn't want Gemini to be secretly brainwashed or implanted with something unclean in her mind, only to end up harming himself. Therefore, Duque believed that this wasn't something Gemini should be involved in. Instead, the Horde was more suitable for Gemini. Gemini was indeed very successful. However, Brainless Roar didn't kill Variana, Serenaron, or Sinestra before taking over the Twilight Fortress. This news made Duque feel as disgusted as swallowing a fly. If Sinestra was there, even if the Horde could take over the Twilight Fortress, they would have to bleed to the last drop and use up all their strength. Unfortunately, Oni's mother wasn't there, which made Brainless Roar famous. That's right, Brainless Roar killed hundreds of thousands of Horde people and forced the other 4 races to leave. However, because he took over the Twilight Fortress and cut off the 2 heads of the traitor Gujar, he was still a great hero among the young orcs. So it's not time yet? Although Duque had messed with the goddess of fate countless times and was about to complete the great achievement of taming fate, fate would occasionally throw a tantrum at Duque, which made Duque feel like he couldn't completely understand it. Duque kept causing trouble, and fate's hand kept trying to fix the flow of fate. It felt like if he didn't intervene when the other party was about to die or when there was a big change in fate, it would be difficult to ruin the path of fate. Just like how Duque tried to kill Thrall when he was still a baby, but he didn't succeed. Master, do you want us to take advantage of the chaos in the Horde to control that grim totem and have her assassinate Thrall? Queen Saloras suggested with a charming smile. The air suddenly froze. A terrifying pressure, as if the entire world was pressing down on them, instantly froze Gemini's body. This wasn't a simple soul suppression, nor was it the purest double purgatory of ice and fire elements. Instead, it was the feeling that every magic circuit in his body was completely controlled by Duque, and every organ in his body was under his control. Salolas found that there was a strange change in her vision. The vision of her left and right eyes was not connected. She immediately understood that her eyeballs were being forced to look with her left eye and to look with her right eye. She noticed that her sister, Auras, was also in the same state. Duque was using such a terrifying and strange method to tell her that the Gemini twins were only his slaves. My puppet. Do whatever I tell you to do, but don't touch anything that you shouldn't do. We were wrong. Master, please spare my life. In the mouth that was still allowed to control itself, Gemini's lips spat out the same weak words. When she regained control of her body, Gemini was completely drenched, as if she had been fished out of the water. After telling Gemini to get out of here, Duque fell into deep thought. At this time, Duque received a soul message from his mount. Duque sent a telepathic message over. Onyxia, I have something for you to do. At this time, Alexstrasza was preparing to hold a dragon meeting in the Wormrest Temple. Although Duque, the mortals, and the guardian Hyjal formed by the god of the wilderness had joined forces to thwart the conspiracy of Lager and Al-Thikir, the threat of the Twilight Hammer was still not eliminated. Therefore, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza decided to convene the Dragon Kings and the Backbone to hold a meeting to deal with the Twilight Hammer. Before the meeting, Alexstrasza and Krasus communicated in the Ruby Temple at the bottom of the Wormrest Temple, but the meeting ended on bad terms. The Queen said, "The mortals have done too much to protect this world. After all, this cataclysm was caused by the traitor Nisario and Enzoth. We, the Wormrest Temple, cannot remain silent. I want to gather all the dragons and attack the believers of the Twilight Hammer on a global scale." Krasus was stunned. All the dragons, including the black dragons and blue dragons? Of course, they are also an important part of the Wormrest Temple. I think the blue dragons have not recovered from the loss of Malygos, so we should not send them out so hastily. Moreover, among the black dragons, Onyxia is the only black dragon who is willing to obey the orders of the Wormrest Temple. We should get rid of them. Could it be that the bronze dragons and green dragons also have their own missions? In the end, just like the previous times, only the Red Dragon Legion will charge and break through the enemy lines? Cleostras, you are too selfless. Nesario is the common enemy of the 5-color dragons. I have decided to hold a meeting of the dragons as soon as possible. I will squeeze enough combat power from the various dragon kings. If this is the case, Your Majesty, please allow me to refuse to participate in the meeting. I don't think this is appropriate, and Duque has not sent us an application for joint operations. This means that he thinks that the alliance alone, with the power of the god of the wilderness at most, is enough to deal with the current situation. When it came to Duque, Alexstrasza was convinced, but she was also a little emotional. Pay attention. It is us 5-color dragons, not mortals, who have been entrusted with the duty of guarding this planet by the Titans. It is an unexpected surprise for mortals and native creatures to contribute to the protection of this world, not an obligation. The only ones who have the obligation to protect are us dragons and the various guardians. Proudly raising her chin, the queen ordered, Cleostras, you don't have to go to the dragon meeting. You stay and protect the red dragon egg in the sanctum. Yes, Your Majesty. Krasis lowered his dragon head. Alexstrasza spread her huge dragon wings that seemed to be able to cover a small town, spread them high, and disappeared from Krasis' sight in a few moments. She went to the top of the Wormris temple that towered into the clouds. It was not a simple flight. The Wormris temple had various layers of subspace defense. In fact, she had just passed through several spaces. Krasis curled up his body and did not even enter a state of pretend sleep. He could not help but think of Duque's report. As an old ally of the Wormris temple, Duque had always been very outstanding. This time, it was also him who reported the matter of the Twilight Dragon in advance. The Twilight Dragon. This was a dragon egg that could contaminate a normal 5-color dragon and then promote the transformation, so that a dragon that should have become a 5-color dragon could mutate into a Twilight Dragon. This news made the Wormris temple highly vigilant, so there was the initiative of Krasis, the big boss of the Red Dragon clan, to personally guard the dragon egg. Worried, Krasis ordered the Red Dragon with a double-headed sword not far away, bring 3 more teams of Dragonians and half-dragons here. Chapter 1850. The Dragonborn answered on the spot, yes. Very soon, the Red Jade Holy Temple became a place where there was a sentry every few steps. Krasis himself, 150 Dragonborn, and 200 half-Dragonborn were in charge. Even if they were attacked by thousands of Twilight disciples, he was confident that they could hold out until Alexstrasza returned. However, his confidence soon disappeared with the sound of the siren. Woo woo woo. It was the Titan's horn. That was the highest level siren. It meant that the invading enemy was strong enough to destroy the dragon's sleep sanctum. Krasis pointed with his right claw and immediately saw black spots like sesame seeds in the far north of the magic mirror's field of vision. Soon, the black spots rapidly grew larger. Not only their shape, but even their color could be seen clearly. The purple scales with a tinge of pink in them made Krasis's dragon eyes narrow abruptly. Twilight dragons. Not just 3 or 2, but thousands of them. Krasis' rich experience in aerial combat told him that almost every Twilight dragon here was equivalent to an adult chromatic dragon. If these Twilight dragons were only a threat to the dragon slumber shrine, then the larger dragons leading them were the real killing machines. First of all, it occupied the center of the entire line of sight. No matter how you looked at it, it would always be the focus. That was Nesario, the Wing of Death. He had an abnormally huge body, with a wingspan of at least 300 meters. His small mountain-level body that swelled up like a balloon was now covered in a layer of terrifying acid as if water had been poured over it. The acid seemed to be controlled by some secret method as it lingered on his huge body. This was not to defend against the enemy's attacks, but to dissolve the dragon limbs that were constantly growing out of his body. Krasis saw with his own eyes in the magic mirror that a dragon's claw that was not inferior to his own suddenly grew out of a hole in Nesario's chest. Then, it twitched violently in the corrosive acid, becoming thinner, and finally, completely dissolved. Nesario alone was enough to give the dragon sleep sanctum a headache. Krasis also saw Sinestra, an ancient female black dragon who used to be extremely powerful. Obviously, she was already dead and had become a death dragon that even the chromatic dragons hated. How ironic. He clearly hated Nesario to death, but after he died and resurrected Nesario, he immediately followed Nesario obediently. Apart from these two familiar dragons, there were other commander-level dragons, Variona and Serenarian. Krasis felt that he wouldn't be able to win against either of them. Only a true dragon aspect would be able to suppress them. The top-notch evil dragon Nesario, the second-level Sinestra, plus 2 Twilight Dragons and thousands of Twilight Dragons. This lineup was definitely luxurious. Roar! In the upper levels of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza's huge dragon shadow rose first, followed by the Emerald Dragon King Izura, the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu, and the new Magic King Kalegos. Following closely behind them were thousands of 4-colored giant dragons. Compared to the relatively simple purple light on the other side, the Dragon Slumber Shrine's light was much more colorful. Alexstrasza had originally asked Onyxia to recruit dark dragons as subordinates. However, after 10,000 years of depravity, most of the adult dark dragons had become dragon villains. They were very disgusted with Onyxia, the so-called princess who brought shame to the black dragons and ran off to be the demigod Duke's mount. There was no dark dragon bird at all. Onyxia wasn't keen on power or taking in subordinates. The strongest subordinates were a bunch of unpresentable young dragons, and then there were fledglings, dark dragons, and draconians. So in theory, there were only 4 of the 5-colored dragons left, and the main force of the army was here today. It was certain that Nesario had led the Twilight Dragon army with the mentality of fighting a decisive battle. What surprised Krasis was that the new Earth aspect dragon Onyxia, who was also present at the meeting today, didn't fight. He didn't know if it was because of the rumor that she was afraid of her parents. Krasis wanted to fight with the queen he admired, but he was more aware of his responsibility. He was guarding the future of the Red Dragon army. Just as Krasis was secretly raising his guard, there was suddenly a shrill scream around him. All of a sudden, every Red Dragon warrior in the entire Red Jade Temple entered a state of combat readiness. They clenched their halberds and swords in their hands. Krasis let out a loud roar, and a surging draconic aura immediately filled the Ruby Jade Temple. "Who? Come out!" As he roared, he turned his head and ordered a draconian, "Quickly inform His Majesty to send more reinforcements here." He was very smart. He knew that the other party had chosen to attack head-on even though they knew he was here. This meant that the other party had absolute confidence in attacking, and not relying on cannon fodder to destroy the dragon eggs here. Krasis didn't know that fate had already taken a major turn. He had no idea how the other party had passed through the realm net of temple guards all over the Dragonbone Waste. The next second, a large number of Twilight Hammer believers poured in. Some attacked the Draconians, while others began to cast evil magic on the dragon eggs scattered throughout the sanctuary. Krasis, of course, immediately attacked these invaders, but he couldn't use breath or magic, because spells with a wide attack range would destroy the dragon eggs. He could only use the most basic physical methods such as grabbing. He wasn't too worried about the situation in front of him, because in terms of combat power, the Red Dragon Guards had the absolute advantage. And as several adult red dragons that were patrolling nearby received the news and rushed over, the battle suddenly became one-sided. "It's safe." Just as Krasis had this thought, an adult red dragon in front of him was instantly torn apart. Scarlet blood spurted out of the dragon's head. Like a dying earthworm, it tumbled violently on the floor of the sanctuary before it hung down and stopped moving. Krasis was shocked. He could clearly feel the powerful aura of the giant dragon outside the gate of the sanctuary. That was a terrifying aura that far surpassed that of the ancient dragon. Those who could have such power were all of the strongest in the dragon race. Usually, only the direct bloodline descendants of the Dragon King could have such strength. That kind of dark power was so dense that just feeling it made him shiver. For a second, Krasis almost thought that Onyxia had betrayed him, or that Nefarian had resurrected. Obviously not. A huge black dragon that he had never seen before stepped into the Red Dragon Holy Land. "Hello, Cleostras, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lazio." Chapter 1851. In the face of a black dragon that had the right to call itself a prince, Croesus felt a lot of pressure. At that moment, he did not notice that a chaotic historical event that should not have happened was happening, or rather, had already happened. In the original history, before the cataclysm, there was an Azeroth version of Orphan Zhao. The red dragons were actually a race that was equivalent to the Virgin Mary. Among them, there was a dragon named Rheostasa who was looking for a pure black dragon egg that had not been invaded by evil. Because she was thinking, if she could somehow find a pure black dragon egg, then it could prove that the black dragons could still live freely in the world without being bewitched by the ancient gods. After all, the mission of the red dragons was to protect life. Getting rid of every black dragon in Azeroth was against their purpose. But if the red dragons could find a way to redeem the black dragons, then it meant that there was hope for them to continue living. The problem was that the wings of death had been corrupted by the ancient gods, and since the ancient war, he had been the enemy of his fellow dragons. The black dragons under his command had also become his minions. One after another, they had become a group of crazy, neurotic fallen black dragons. But would there be a dragon that could lay a pure dragon egg that was not affected by the ancient gods at all? And if it was not controlled by the wings of death and the evil power of the ancient gods, what would the future of this dragon be? So, the Virgin Mary red dragon Rheostasa caught a female black dragon, Xianxia, and forced her to study how to lay eggs. In the end, she laid an egg, and it was a very rare egg that belonged to the wings of death, Nisario. For this matter, be it the wings of death who was frantically searching for this egg or the red dragons, they were all caught up in this whirlpool. Moreover, this egg had its own will even before it was born. When the egg, although not yet out of the shell, developed to a maturity level where it could think independently and carry out plans, it sent out a cry for help to a group of sneaky fellows who were proficient in stealing and could even come and go freely under the eyes of the red dragons, the thieves of Ravenholt Manor. Thus, there was a strange case of the dragon egg disappearing. After many twists and turns in the plot, the black dragon prince Razio was born. With the help of all kinds of resources, he quickly grew into a powerful dark dragon and called himself the last dark dragon. In theory, he was both good and evil in the original history, and had a good relationship with King Anduin Rin. However, at the time node of the King of Draenor, he participated as the mastermind in rescuing Braindead Roar and letting Braindead Roar go to another timeline to cause trouble. All in all, this was a powerful, intelligent, and sinister dragon prince. Unfortunately, fate had its way with dragons. In this life, with Onyxia's cleansing, the title of the last normal black dragon would not fall onto Lachio. More importantly, without the protection of the red dragon tribe, Lachio wouldn't have the luxury to wander around the Dragon Slumber Shrine, the Alliance, and other forces. So, Ratio, who was in front of Croesus, was obviously a henchman of the Wings of Death. No one knew that because of fate, Wing died prematurely. And the price of resurrection was the price of his own son smashing Nefarian. What was even more infuriating to Wing was that his disappointing traitorous woman had shamelessly knelt down and licked his great enemy, Duque, as a mount. So, after Nisario was resurrected by Enzos, he paid more attention to his children than ever before. So, in this life, there was no such thing as Nishiandra being forced to give birth to a pure dragon egg. Almost as soon as Wing regained his freedom, he found Nishiandra and directly left this female black dragon, who he had almost killed when he was having sex with her, with an evil child that truly belonged to him. Lachio, in this life, he was the successor of the new black dragon army, and appeared in the Dragon Slumber Shrine as a symbol of absolute evil. As soon as he attacked, he directly beheaded an adult red dragon. This destructive power was simply frightening. Croesus was ready to risk his life. Just then, another voice suddenly broke in. "Ah, I didn't expect that damned father of mine would actually give me a younger brother. This is really making me worried. Should I kill my younger brother to prevent him from fighting with me for the position of Earth Guardian? Or should I persuade him to be like me, to become a mount in exchange for the world's forgiveness?" A graceful woman wearing a black robe with golden edges leisurely walked into the red jade shrine. The one who came in was naturally the Black Dragon Princess Xianxia in her human form. The Pentashade dragons each had their own holy lands in No Scent, because it was an absolute protection zone for nurturing the next generation. Even if Xianxia was now a dragon aspect, it was an absolute taboo to enter the dragon egg hatching area of another dragon race without permission. But Krasis couldn't care less. Xianxia was obviously here to help. The Black Dragon Princess suddenly cast the ultimate transformation spell, and in less than a second, she turned into a black dragon that was a size larger than Lachio and confronted him. Clairstraz, hurry up and kill those Twilight spellcasters. They want to pollute the dragon eggs. If necessary, even the dragon eggs must be purified with dragon breath. After saying that, Xianxia flapped her wings and pounced towards her younger brother. It was not uncommon for a battle between two demigod colossal dragons to turn into an earth-shattering one another. It was Duque who ordered her to save the day. If the Red Dragon race's dragon eggs were all destroyed by the shockwaves of the battle, the Red Dragon race would eventually go berserk. It would be better if she didn't come at all. The Black Dragon took a deep breath as soon as she opened her mouth. Although she was in her human form, she could use her ultimate move earlier if she accumulated fire elements in advance. The conical dragon breath of nearly 60 degrees Celsius was too much for Lachio to handle. The magic resistance of the Pentashade dragons was quite high. Their tough dragon scales and dragon skin were born with high-purity elements. It was not easy to injure a dragon with elemental attacks. Often, dragons had to rely on physical combat to decide the outcome of a battle. Xianxia's deep breath seemed to have broken this rule. Lazio jumped backward as if he was jumping. His wings flapped continuously, and he almost screamed as he dodged this deep breath. How can it be so hot? Xianxia grinned and revealed a mocking smile. Don't you know who my master is? Chapter 1852. Ordinary flames could hardly threaten a real WM, let alone a demigod WM. Xianxia only knew how to use fire. Originally, with her aptitude, using the deep breath to its limit was not a big deal. Dealing with elites was indeed impressive, but dealing with commander-level enemies was starting to feel like it wasn't enough. This was determined by the upper limit of her vitality. Ever since Du Mok took control of the Land of Fire and became the master of the fire elemental world, everything had changed. Since he could generously transfer a portion of the elements to an outsider like Kale, he could not leave Xianxia behind. After all, she cooperated with him at all times. Whatever position he asked her to, the Black Dragon would do it. It wouldn't be a bad idea to occasionally have a more focused play. 5%. This was the amount of elements that Du Mok gave his mount. As the Land of Fire further integrated into the world of Azeroth, it communicated and complemented the fire elements of the entire world. In fact, the absolute amount of elements that this element took up was increasing by the day. Having external assistance and relying solely on one's own physical strength were two completely different things. At that time, Lachio also urgently spat out dragon breath to resist deep breath. Firstly, it was rushed, and secondly, there was an absolute difference in quality and quantity. The fire elements that he spat out were actually caught in midair by the more mysterious, deep breath, and rolled back to burn Lacio's dragon body. Lachio screamed and retreated from the passage to the Red Jade Holy Temple. He had to retreat. Xianxia, who was even larger in size, had already pounced forward. The Red Jade Holy Temple was located below the Dragon Sleep Temple. Although the space was not small even by the standards of a dragon, it was not suitable for a battle. For a dragon, most of the time, strength, agility, and vitality were directly proportional to its size. The larger the dragon, the stronger its overall attributes. In the limited space of the Red Jade Holy Temple, it could be forced to the point where there was nowhere to hide. It would become the most primitive wrestling. Looking at its size, Lachio knew that he was going to lose. He could only retreat out of the Red Jade Holy Temple and fight for space. Xianxia pounced after him. Lachio glanced at the battle in the sky north of the Dragonbone Waste and fled north without looking back. His father and mother were there, and according to the intelligence, they were the nemesis of his good sister. Although it was embarrassing, the dark dragon race was mostly people with no moral integrity. Losing face was better than losing one's life. Lazio flew north without looking back. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt his massive dragon body stagnate. It was the illusion of suddenly falling into a pool of paste. Impossible! Lazio exclaimed. What he said was impossible. He subconsciously believed that there was no existence that could use simple magic to imprison a demigod black dragon. That's not something a mortal can do. It wasn't something that a female black dragon like Xianxia, who only knew how to play with fire, would do. In his astonishment, Lazio twisted his snake-like neck and looked behind him. He saw something that made his soul jump out of his body. On Xianxia's dragon claws, there was a huge ring-like object. This should be some kind of magic tool. Lazio watched as his sister activated one of them, and then his body, which had just regained some mobility, immediately became sluggish again. Demigod tool? Normally, no demigod would inject a large amount of divine power to create a single-use magic tool. After all, it was quite exhausting and not beneficial. Coincidentally, there was a demigod who did this, and this demigod was undoubtedly Duque. He had engraved the Titan runes on the huge mithril ring so that he could instantly use the Titan's power to activate deceleration. That was equivalent to him casting a demigod spell himself. Even with the demigod dragon's magic resistance, there would be a moment of numbness. This was simply a waste, but in a battle between demigod dragons, this was undoubtedly the key factor that would tip the scales of victory. The massive black dragon princess seized the opportunity and pounced forward. She swept her dragon tail from a high angle and hit her brother's waist heavily. Every dragon's tail was different. Her dragon tail was just like a standard meteor hammer. Not to mention that the end was huge and oval, and there were a few extremely hard and thick spikes. Lazio immediately let out a wail. Not only was his left rib pierced, but he was also pulled by the force of the attack, leaving several deep wounds that exposed his bones. The violent blow caused him to fall from midair. He crashed into the snowy field full of dragon bones. His colossal body smashed through several dragon skeletons in an instant. It was as if his actions had disturbed the souls of the sleeping dragons, and the dragonbone wilderness seemed to make a dissatisfied grunt at that moment. Sorry, my stupid brother. Since I'm here, I won't let you go to the north. In mid-air, Xianxia, who was flapping her huge wings, stared coldly at her blood relatives. Other families would at most fight. The Black Dragon family was simply asking for death. Lazio knew that he had failed, not only in terms of strategy, but also in terms of combat power and combat experience. He was inferior to his sister in terms of elements. What was worse was that because of his age and lack of combat experience, he could not unleash his tyrannical physical fitness. It couldn't be helped. He was controlled by his father, Nisario, as soon as he was born. His father was not a benevolent father. He would slowly feed him moves and teach him how to fight. His father was an empty fish, and he directly ordered him to pollute the dragon eggs of the Red Jade Holy Temple and the other temples. If he did not do well, he would be killed. Originally, Krasis would be a good opponent and a good whetstone. Using the difference in rank, Lazio could hone his skills in actual combat, and while he was entangled with Krasis, the idiotic Twilight believers below could complete the task given by his father. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. But why did an enhanced version of his sister suddenly appear? This was clearly not giving him a way out. Completely afraid to approach his sister, Lazio struggled on the ground, turned around and flew east. He did not realize that it was Xianxia who was hovering in the air just now, forcing him to fly to the east. My stupid brother. I wish I could say goodbye to you forever today. Xianxia glanced at the fierce battle in the northern sky, and then flew after Lazio. Lazio flapped his wings, and the more he flew, the more he felt that something was wrong. He used all his strength to fly, but he felt that his sister's Xianxia's speed should not be that low. Just as he flew over the Dragon's Pine River on the east side of the Dragonbone Waste, a large cluster of dense light suddenly approached at high speed. Boom! Lazio was hit by hundreds of cannonballs. Accompanied by the Black Dragon Prince's painful cry, He fell again and slammed into the ice of the Dragon's Pine River, breaking the ice by the river. He fell into the water. Chapter 1853. Everything was a trap. When Lassio's huge body fell into the water, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. Next to him, there was a huge water giant sitting in the river, hugging its legs. The river was not shallow, but compared to this underwater giant, it was like a small ditch. What made Lassio's heart palpitate was the strong waves of water elemental energy emitted from the giant. It was definitely not a small sea giant. That was, a dumb giant dragon actually fell into the river. Normally, it was very difficult to transmit sound underwater. However, this giant's voice directly entered Lassio's mind. Lassio almost peed his pants. He knew who this water giant with a strange golden chain on his chest was. It was the former lord of the water elemental realm, Neptulin. Lassio felt like he was being attacked by a dog. "You're the former lord of the water elemental realm. What are you doing in this river?" Neptulin grinned and rose to his feet. As he stood up, the water level of Dragon's Pine River, which had not changed for thousands of years, suddenly rose by 100 meters in 10 seconds. This was a very exaggerated number. Under normal circumstances, the banks on both sides of the river would definitely suffer. However, the water level only rose to the width of the river. The banks did not move at all. Neptulin was obviously trying to trap him. Lassio choked on a mouthful of water. At this moment, how could he not know that his opponent was here to kill him? He struggled to leave this strange water body. Unfortunately, he only managed to struggle for 3 seconds before several white lines of water closed in on him from afar. One of them was a petite female naga, only slightly larger than a human. She was dressed in luxurious accessories, and judging from the golden crown on her head, she was at least a queen. The other one was a huge water elemental, and the last one was a huge and ugly strange fish. "Neptulin, good job. This time, you've done a good job." The female naga spoke with the voice of her soul. Neptulin's face showed a look of joy. It did not matter if it was fake or not. The naga queen turned her head. "Oh, it was actually the legendary Prince Ratio. What an honor to meet you. I am Queen Naga, the demigod of Lake Azeroth Lord Emir, the Queen Regent of the tidal throne, Vashj. This is the first time we meet, and I believe it will also be the last time." With that, she raised her hand. Neptulin, Unstable Hydas, and Yusler, the 3 super thugs, grinned hideously as they pounced on Lachio. In the northern sky, an incomparably tragic internal war of the dragon clan was going on. As far as the eye could see, there were gorgeous and dazzling dragon breaths and flashing magic spells everywhere, and the air was filled with entangled battles. Whether it was the Wyvern Guardian of the Dragon Slumber Shrine or the Twilight Wyvern belonging to Nesario, they were all bloodthirsty and used the fiercest means to deal with these enemies who were theoretically their compatriots. Perhaps the moment they met, a large cloud of murky and stinky blood rain would fall from the sky, or even scattered pieces of internal organs. With a flash, the dragon claw slashed down, and perhaps an entire row of ribs was neatly severed. In terms of combat experience, the 4-color dragon warriors were obviously superior to the Twilight Wyvern. The aerial combat experience accumulated over the years was not something that the Twilight Wyvern, who grew up on stimulants and pills, could compare to. In the initial battle, the 4-color dragon and the Twilight Wyvern had a shocking battle loss ratio of 1:10. However, the Dragon Slumber Coalition army immediately discovered that something was wrong. The strength and physical fitness of the Twilight Wyvern were comparable to that of the 4-color dragon. Their special ability was to create a unique Twilight domain space, and use this space to crazily absorb energy from the outside world to promote their own growth. As long as there was enough energy for them to absorb, they could grow rapidly. It only took a few months or even a few weeks for a Twilight Wyvern to hatch to adulthood, but it took hundreds or thousands of years for an ordinary dragon to hatch to adulthood. The terror of having Nesario in charge was reflected at this time. This was a terrifying characteristic that did not exist in the original history. Enzos had bestowed a terrifying halo effect on the Wings of Death. This terrifying halo, which covered an area of more than 10 kilometers, greatly strengthened the twilight domain of each twilight wyvern. Not only was the domain larger, but the effect was also more amazing. As long as any energy transfer occurred in the twilight domain, the energy would be absorbed. Whether it was the aftermath of magic that was cast, or the flesh and blood that fell from midair and passed through the space. Whether it was the four-color dragons or the twilight wyverns, as long as it was energy, it would be absorbed without any resistance. Many of the dragons found that their opponents suddenly swelled up as if they were inflated, and then their speed, agility, and vitality skyrocketed as if they had been injected with chicken blood. At first, the twilight wyverns did not have any brains and only knew how to fight by instinct. However, after a few rounds, as long as they did not die, they could use the energy absorbed from their surroundings to repair their bodies, and learn new tricks from their opponents to deal with the four-color dragon. Soon, the battle-loss ratio between the two sides changed dramatically. From the initial 1-10, it became 1-3. Sister, the sleeping dragon temple is finished. Isra shouted. Alexstrasza, of course, knew that it would not work, but she really could not spare her hands. King against king, general against general, soldier against soldier. Just Nisario, who was as huge as a mountain, was enough for the few dragon aspects to suffer. Not to mention the addition of Sinestra, and the two twilight wyverns, Varian and Serenarian, who were quite capable of fighting. Varian and Serenarian were not as strong as the dragon aspects, but they could steadily suppress the ancient wyvern of the four-color dragon. After a few rounds, 3 ancient wyverns had been seriously injured and forced to retreat. In fact, if it were not for Nisario frantically chasing after his 3 former siblings, the Sleeping Dragon Coalition army would have suffered even more losses. At this time, a black dragon shadow suddenly entered the field of vision of the two sides. Your Majesty Alexstrasza, the Ruby Jade Temple was ambushed by the Black Dragon Prince Ratio, but I took care of him. Now it is basically safe. The first half of Onyxia's words made the Red Dragon Queen's heart jump to her throat, but the second half made her feel for the first time that this junior was quite useful. The black dragon turned her head and taunted the 2 twilight wyverns who were obviously several sizes larger. Varian and Serenarian, right? Poor guys. He didn't know anything and was used as a weapon. Do you think you are very strong? Let me tell you, I can fight 10 of you guys. It was a clumsy provocation, but for the relatively simple twilight wyverns, it was good enough as long as it worked. In an instant, Onyxia had pulled away 2 of the enemy's main forces. Before leaving, she also sent a message to the Red Dragon Queen. Duque requests to join the battle. Chapter 1854. Duque? Alexstrasza really had a love-hate relationship with Duque. Once upon a time, Duque was just such a small and weak human. At that time, she hung out with Duque purely because she felt that this human was interesting. It was easy to get tired of living after living for too long. This was not a derogatory term, but a literal one. If it was not for the power and responsibility given to her by the Titans, she really did not know how she had lived for the past 25,000 years. Perhaps she would have developed strange interests like some blue dragons. For example, falling in love with a well, or falling in love with the fairy sister, soul healer, in the graveyard. After seeing all kinds of situations in the mortal world, her dragon life only had a few interests left: curiosity and excitement. Of course, she would not put herself in danger just to experience the feeling of heartbeat just for the sake of pure excitement. Because of the novelty and excitement, it was more like a hobby outside of fulfilling her duty as a guardian. That was why she did not hesitate to help Duque. Perhaps it was to repay a debt of gratitude, or perhaps it was purely to see how far this little human who always surprised her could go. She did not expect that in a mere 20 years, not even 1,000th of her life as a dragon guardian, Duke Marcus, a human with meager strength at the beginning, had grown to a level comparable to her. Alexstrasza was a little conflicted. She was happy that Duque was strong. He was too strong. She was conflicted. She always felt that she had lived for 25,000 years in vain. Why could it not compare to what Duque had achieved in 1,000th of her time? Living for too long, living for too long. Dragon hearts would become a little conflicted. Mortals clearly looked very simple, so why did a monstrous peerless powerhouse like Duque appear? Not only was he strong, but he could also stir up the general trend of the entire world. Even she felt that all the dragon guardians and guardians were led by the nose by him. However, every single one of them was willing to do so because his actions were righteous and in line with the way of the heavens and the way of the titans. Sometimes, when Alexstrasza looked at Xianxia, who had a terrible reputation and was cunning, and saw her intelligence plummet after being subdued by Duque, she would see a rare joy on Xianxia's face that was almost impossible for dragons to have. She couldn't help but put herself in Xianxia's shoes. If he became Duque's mount like Xianxia, every time she thought of this, the queen would feel like her heart was in a mess. This was practically a blasphemy against the duties of a titan. She found it difficult to describe the complex feelings in her heart, but she forcefully pushed them out of her mind. Time returned to the present. For a moment, she was distracted, and she was almost hit by Nsario's huge claws. Fortunately, although Nsario's body size had increased, his speed and agility seemed to have decreased significantly, which gave her a chance to save him. She screamed in her heart, "I can't hesitate anymore. I am the leader of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. All the dragons are waiting for my command. A leader must never hesitate." As far as the eye could see, countless dragons were fighting in the sky. She already knew how terrifying the twilight dragons were. 10,000 years ago, Nsario had betrayed the Pentashade dragons, and the dragons that had once blotted out the sky had withered because of that battle. It took the four-colored dragons 10,000 years to barely restore their numbers to a less miserable state. If she cared about her pride and hoped to use the power of the Dragon Slumber Shrine to deal with the resurrected traitor, Nsario, she was afraid that the Dragon Slumber Shrine would suffer more damage than the last time. The enemy in front of her was strong, and she was weak. Even if she won, it would only be a Pyrrhic victory. What about the void battlefield in the future? Alexstrasza gritted her dragon teeth and spread her divine thoughts. "Duque, I know you're here. Come and help. I know what you're thinking. The Dragon Slumber Shrine will be the most loyal ally of the Alliance in the future." Her spiritual call instantly received a reply. "Though I wanted to make a move a long time ago, but I was afraid of interfering with the internal affairs of the Dragon Slumber Shrine." "You make it sound like you didn't have a part in the first siege against Nsario." The man and the dragon teased each other. Everyone knew that the little knot in their hearts had disappeared without a trace. Originally, the Dragon Slumber Coalition army did not know how the Alliance would make a move, but they soon found out. Woo woo woo. It was a strange sound coming from the east of the Dragonbone Wilderness. Many twilight dragons turned their heads to look to the east in a daze, but the four-colored dragons came to their senses and squatted down with their hands on their heads. Oh no, it was a gesture of self-defense. Countless artillery shells gathered into a torrential rain of artillery shells that were denser than locusts. They crossed a distance of 10,000 meters and blasted toward the area where the dragons were fighting fiercely in midair. At a glance, the Alliance's artillery was simply a trap for its allies. This was an indiscriminate attack. In midair, the four-colored dragons and the twilight dragons were all wrestling with each other, and there was no obvious formation to distinguish. At most, it was a cooperation between a few dragons in twos and threes. It was not a positional battle like in a traditional war. But the moment the artillery shells exploded, the essence of Duque's bombardment could be seen. All the artillery shells were the classic, Type 3 bullets. This kind of shotgun shot out from a standard barrel would explode when it flew into the air of the battle, forming a large number of fragments. For enemies with relatively weak bodies, this was a fatal metal storm. Even if it was a griffin, its skin would be lacerated and its wings would be crippled in this kind of storm. For a giant dragon that was covered in dragon scales and dragon skin that could be said to have thick skin and flesh, and even the dragon's eyes had a layer of extremely hard cornea, the lethality of the shrapnel was almost zero. More importantly, these artillery shells were all specially made for the holy light. The Twilight Dragon's Twilight Domain was derived from the classic power of corruption. It was a perfect counter to the Holy Light. This meant that the four-color dragons were completely fine, while the Twilight Dragons cried out in pain as if they had been splashed with acid. It was like a cooperative game. As long as the option, friendly damage, was not ticked, you could casually stab your teammates and be fine. It seemed very unscientific, but it happened just like that. This is amazing. Isra could not help but exclaim. What did the Twilight Dragons rely on to become stronger and stronger? Wasn't it that disgusting Twilight Domain? Once the Twilight Domain was suppressed, the four-colored dragons began to gain the upper hand again. In the sky above the Dragon's Pine River in the east, a huge fleet was circling the flying fortress Naxxramas. In fact, at the moment, less than half of the fleet fired their cannons. Naxxramas's secondary cannons were firing. In the command room, Tyron's beautiful eyes darted around. Duque, did you expect that Lesio would attack the Red Jade Holy Temple? Beside her, Duque shrugged. How could that be? I only expected that Nesio would choose to attack the dragon eggs of the four-colored dragons. Chapter 1855. To be honest, he really did not think that sending Oni would actually catch Lachio. In fact, he did not even know if Lachio still existed in this world. Unfortunately, Tyrant pouted and crossed her arms, looking as if she did not believe him. Duque almost choked to death. Damn. Is this considered pretending to be the god of prophecy too much that people don't believe me even if I fail? At this time, Vashch's magic message came. That new black dragon Prince Lachio is almost done. What should we do? In the magic mirror, Vashch's red hair floated in the water, giving off a different kind of sexiness. Duque was not in the mood to appreciate it. He rubbed his chin, weighing the impact of Lachio's life and death. No matter how he thought about it, Lachio did not seem to have done anything good, nor did he really affect the general trend of history. To put it bluntly, he was the kind of guy who was an eyesore, but it did not seem to be a problem to kill him. Duque hesitated for 3 seconds, then made a throat-cutting salute. Remember to annihilate his soul. In the scene, the Black Dragon Prince, who was supposed to be a part of history, was dancing in the water. He was dragged deeper and deeper into the water by Neptulin, who was a rough man underwater. He was tossed and turned by the waves, and he sank deeper and deeper into the water. Lachio was chased all the way from Dragon's Pine River to the sea by a group of ferocious underwater bosses, through the east side of the ancient beach, and all the way to the deepest trench. A dragon soaring in the sky falling into the water was a huge mistake in itself. Now, Lachio had to pay the price in advance for his undisplayed ambition and possible mistakes. Perhaps this was unfair to a formidable dragon, but since he had chosen Nisario's side, then he was sorry. Hydas, Tidewalker, Yusler, and Neptulin swarmed forward. They continuously used various water attacks to create wounds on Lachio's body, weakening his vitality. When his speed and strength dropped drastically, Marogri the Tidewalker threw a huge anchor into his waist. Then, Neptulin threw a thick black chain and strangled his neck. Then, Hydas covered his limbs with high-purity water elemental energy. Finally, Yusler pounced on him and bit his neck. Spetsini? That was Lacio's last plea. It was too late. The dignified Black Dragon Prince died sullenly in the deep sea. Vashch quietly sat in the shallow waters, casting spells as she gazed at the offering in the sea. She was suppressing and erasing Lachio's soul. On the east side of Dragon's Pine River, a neat array of cannons kept firing. The artillery finally angered Nisario, who ordered the Twilight Dragons to attack the Alliance's air force. Under his command, Valriona and Thanarian, who were being kited by Onyxia, turned around and flew east towards the Alliance's air force. An ear-piercing alarm sounded in Naxxramas almost instantly. Unlike the previous Level 2 alarm, it was preparation for an attack. This was the alarm for an enemy attack. The Alliance soldiers in the intelligence room of the stronghold observed the incoming enemy through the mage's eyes in Dragonbone Waste, as well as the stronghold's own enemy tracking system and binoculars. They stared dumbfoundedly at the dragons in the sky. The Alliance had experienced many battles since its establishment. Since Naxxramas fell into the hands of the Alliance, it had also experienced several battles, but it had never tried to fight such a large group of dragons. The last time it faced a large-scale attack was in Northrend, against the gargoyles of the Lich King Arthas. The purple-red twilight dragons approached quickly. They spread their wings and rode the wind, sweeping over from the battlefield 10 kilometers away. 10 kilometers, which was 10,000 meters, sounded very far. For these flying behemoths, it would only take a few minutes. They're really fast. Bu Lang Bronzebeard stared at this scene on the monitor and couldn't help but curl his lips. Boys, use the armor-piercing bullets. Grenades are useless against these big guys. The 3 holy light projectiles had been proven to only be used for harassment, not to kill them. Bu Lang shouted, old-style main cannons. Fire in unison. Cannonballs triggered by TNT explosives were continuously fired from the muzzles of the stronghold. Even though the new cannons were all equipped with brakes to reduce the reaction force, they didn't dare to fire in a real sense. The continuous impact still caused the entire stronghold to move nearly 10 meters to the east, under the surveillance cameras controlled by the observers. Bu Lang clearly saw that the old-style cannonballs, even after being treated with holy light, still couldn't penetrate the tough skin and scales of the Twilight Dragons. Although some of the Twilight Dragons' wings were damaged, they only slowed down. Anyway, after a round of cannonballs that seemed to shake the earth, not a single Twilight Dragon fell in midair. The human gunners could almost see the contempt at the corners of the Twilight Dragons' mouths. Taking advantage of the intermission of the human cannons, these dragon-shaped monsters created with evil secret methods quickly closed the distance between them and the flying stronghold. Many of the Alliance soldiers' hearts were about to jump out of their chests at this moment. If the Alliance's cannons couldn't cause effective damage to the enemy, it meant that this was likely to turn into a massacre of the Alliance's air force. At this time, Duque's leisurely voice sounded. Bu Lang, relax. Don't we still have Mimran? According to my calculations, the new cannonballs can definitely penetrate those purple lizards flying in the sky. Mimran, who looked like a mechanical gnome, had 2 light bulb eyes that kept flashing. That's right, Duque was King crazy about the Alliance's technology tree again. The biggest feature of transmigrators adding talent points was that they wouldn't add the wrong talent points. In fact, 1 kilometer behind the group of Twilight Dragons, Isra was leading a large group of green dragons to help the Alliance. Sister, I don't think we need to help Duque's side. Whether we need to or not is one thing, whether we go or not is another. Go quickly, don't be in a straight line with the Twilight Dragons and the Alliance's cannons. Follow them from the side and back. If necessary, help at any time, Alexstrasza instructed. The main force of the Twilight Dragons had turned east, which meant that the pressure on the 4-colored dragons was greatly reduced. In theory, concentrating all the dragons to besiege Nesario was the right way to go, but she couldn't let such a large group of Twilight Dragons run around. In fact, except for Isra, who was particularly confident in Duque, many green dragons didn't think that mere mortals could block thousands of Twilight Dragons with their flying creations alone. In their eyes, the thin 3-dimensional defense line of the Alliance's flying fleet was no match for the locust-like Twilight Dragons, be it in terms of strength or visual effects. In particular, when the Alliance's first round of main cannons fired did not even bring down a single Twilight Dragon, most of the green dragons in the Green Dragon Army confirmed their thoughts. Chapter 1856. After all, they were a group of true dragons that were charging over aggressively. Regardless of whether they were products of accelerated growth or not, they were not a bunch of buzzing locusts, but creatures at the top of the food chain on planet Azeroth. Under everyone's gazes, the purplish-red ominous dragon cloud was getting closer and closer to the Alliance's air fleets and strongholds. Everyone knew that unless it was a dragon that was good at magic, a dragon's attack range was basically no more than 200 meters. Beyond 200 meters, the dragons could only passively take a beating. Once within 200 meters, the giant dragons would use their dragon breath, their powerful bodies, their sharp claws, and their tails, which were even more terrifying than siege hammers, to teach anyone who dared to enter the giant dragon's killing range a lesson. Apart from a few powerful creatures like golems, most existences would only feel the deepest despair and helplessness when faced with a dragon at close range. It was the same for the Alliance's battleships. If the largest main cannon could not penetrate the dragon's scales and skin, then the smaller cannons and anti-aircraft cannons would not be able to do so. At this moment, the Alliance's strongholds and battleships suddenly flashed with a blinding light. The Alliance had fired again. No one took this volley of cannons seriously. The purplish-red dragon cloud that looked like it was rolling over finally collided with the dense black dots formed by the cannonballs. Just as the new cannonball was fired, Duque smiled and said, "Actually, dragon scales and skin are fine. We might as well change our way of thinking and treat them as more durable sloped armor. As long as we find the right way, it's easy to penetrate them." "Is that so?" Bu Lang stroked his beard. The great gnome craftsman Gerben was also scratching his bald head. Why did the dwarves and gnomes like Duque so much? Wasn't it because Duque could always give them a lot of scientific inspiration, allowing their most beloved technology to advance? Duque had many ideas, and they were even more creative than Mimiran's bold and imaginative ideas. What was even more impressive was that most of Duque's ideas were feasible. Duque's words had undoubtedly opened a new window for the two of them. Even Mimir began to mutter to himself. The speed of the cannonball was very fast. If one's eyesight was good enough, they would discover that the cannonball was actually just a flying tool. It was just that it was faster. The cutting-edge cannonballs tore through the atmosphere at high speed. Some of the cannonballs even left long white lines as they passed through the clouds. The metallic afterimages pulled out beams of light in the air and pierced into the group of twilight dragons like sharp blades. This time, these creatures that came from the Black Dragon King's family's Black Technology Laboratory were not so lucky. In an instant, their wings or bodies were pierced. Perhaps it was because of the amount of gunpowder in the shell, or some other reason. Only about 100 twilight dragons howled as they fell from the sky, sprinkling a foul and evil rain of blood. Even so, there was a burst of loud and clear cheers in the fortress command. "Hooray! Success! We've finally defeated those damned lizards." He had only killed less than 100 twilight dragons, which was a negligible loss for a group of more than 3,000 dragons. Hidden behind this small victory was the victory of mortals and technology. The Alliance's technology continued to develop, and today, they could already use their own new inventions to deal with the creatures at the top of the food chain on this planet, the giant dragons. It was not difficult to envision that in the near future, weapons that could kill demons on a large scale could be developed. This was what encouraged the party of technology, which was led by the dwarves and gnomes. Gerben almost jumped in front of Duque and shook hands with Duque. "Congratulations, your tungsten core armor-piercing shell was a success." Duque replied with a smile, "It's our tungsten core armor-piercing shell." Gerben said with great sincerity, "No, no, no. Without your idea, none of us would have thought of such a method. We're just the processors of science." Duque said something extremely cool. "Then, I'm actually just standing on the shoulders of the giants of science." At this moment, even Bu Lang, who was commanding, and Mimiran, who was watching the battle, as well as the dwarves, gnome scientists, and craftsmen were all in awe of Duque. The tungsten core armor-piercing shell was something that Duque had created using his transmigrator knowledge. The tungsten core armor-piercing shell was actually an excellent armor-piercing shell developed after the 1970s on Earth. The warhead of this armor-piercing shell used the principle of shell removal and the new structure and materials of high-density tungsten alloy. It had characteristics such as high initial velocity, low trajectory, short flight time, high accuracy, and great penetration power. It could effectively deal with fast-moving targets. The density of the core was high, and it was the complete opposite of hard steel or tungsten carbide cores that would shatter during the penetration process. The tungsten alloy core was more malleable and could penetrate armor by splashing. It had excellent secondary penetration characteristics, and it was more effective against large angles, sandwich, and multi-layered composite armor. It was widely used in large-caliber guns and small-caliber artillery shells at home and abroad as ammunition against lightly armored targets such as armored transport vehicles and attack helicopters. It just so happened that Azeroth had discovered the tungsten, and Duque had conveniently used it. Originally, with the industrial foundation of the Alliance, it was not enough to produce such a beautiful tungsten core armor-piercing shell. With Mimirin's workshop, this problem was easily solved. However, to avoid provoking the Dragon Slumber Temple, Duque had deliberately ordered the armor-piercing shell to be filled with less gunpowder and not use additional fragmentation structures. However, Duque had ordered the engraving of some fire elemental runes. Otherwise, this round of bombardment alone would have been enough to teach those stupid Twilight Dragons a lesson. If they survived, they would have to remember to take a detour when they saw the Alliance's warships in the future. In fact, the Twilight Dragons that were hit this time, unless they were especially unfortunate and had been hit by dozens of cannons, they would not die. Most of the Twilight Dragons that were shot would be injured but not killed. It was not the kind of fatal injury, but the kind that just happened to penetrate the dragon's scales and skin, but could not penetrate the flesh. Stimulated by this round of bombardment, the Twilight Dragons immediately roared and accelerated towards the Alliance's fleet. On the other side, the Green Dragon army was also shocked. Seeing that although the Twilight Dragons had suffered losses, their losses were limited. They actually felt an inexplicable sense of peace. It turned out that mortals were not particularly powerful. In their hearts, the Green Dragons could not help but acknowledge the strength of the Alliance. Just as the Twilight Dragons flew to within a kilometer of Naxxramas and the Flying Fleet, the fortress and the large spaceships suddenly opened their hatches one by one, revealing the real killer move inside. The entire airspace suddenly flashed with an incomparably dazzling fire. Chapter 1857. In the flying magic city of Dalajan, there were thousands of magic cannons of various calibers and different elemental power outputs. In the mouth of the dragons, the magic cannons that these humans and elves were so proud of were called weak, because they were the most superficial use of the elements. In order to ensure the stability and operability of the cannons, the magic craftsmen had to repeatedly reduce the total output of the elements and reduce their fluctuations. And the high-level mysteries would undoubtedly crush the low-level mysteries. This kind of magic cannon with low elemental energy and elemental density was, of course, regarded as a toy by the dragons. Now, all history had been rewritten. After all, if there were genuine fire elemental creatures as cannons, who would need a special cannon to guide the fire elemental? That's right. Standing in front of the wide-open cabin doors were fat fire elemental beings that were docilely standing in a battle formation. These fire elemental creatures burned thousands or even tens of thousands of degrees all over their bodies. Their existence itself was a great pressure on the surrounding environment. For example, without those special frost protection circles, not to mention Naxxramas, it was estimated that the decks of those big ships would melt. With those circles, the fire elemental creatures inside would be extremely unhappy. In the past, these irascible guys would definitely give the mages who controlled them a headache. Now, under the supervision of the fire demon troops directly under the King of Flames, Duque, these simple-minded fire elemental creatures stood like obedient babies. After studying the attack range of the fire elemental creatures, Bu Lang, the master of artillery, endured until the last kilometer before opening the hatch. It was not until the last 500 meters that he gave the order to open fire. Thick flaming arms rose up, and the purest and most primitive fire elements shot out from their palms. In the void near each battleship with fire elemental creatures, more fire elements could be seen connecting here through the void channel. From a distance, each battleship looked like a Titan battleship wrapped in a huge flame rune network. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. There was no deafening roar of the cannons, but the fire elements that poured out in 3 or 4 breaths had a terrifying destructive power far beyond that of conventional artillery. From the 10 rows of hatches in the Naxxramas stronghold, in addition to the full firepower of 300 battleships, these tens of thousands of fire elemental elites were enough to boil the entire airspace. You can't hit the Twilight Wyvern when it's in rapid evasion? Never mind. If he couldn't hit the front, he could still hit the back. Even if he missed, he could at least increase the density of fire elements in the air. What was an explosion? An explosion would release a large amount of energy in an extremely short period of time, producing a high temperature and releasing a large amount of gas. It causes a high-pressure chemical reaction or state change in the surrounding medium and is extremely destructive at the same time. Generally speaking, this required a small space. Duque's fighting style was even more imposing. He commanded the fire elemental creatures to heat up the space that the Twilight Dragon was about to pass through. It was a vast space with a diameter of nearly 1 kilometer. There was no obstruction or separation, and a strong wind blew past. Normally, this would be impossible to achieve. But as the actual controller of the 3 great elemental realms of Azeroth, water, fire, and wind, turning the impossible into the possible was what Duque was doing. On an open-air platform to the west of Naxxramas, 2 blonde and 1 silver-haired elven women stood there, letting the wind blow their long hair. If you carefully sensed it, you would know that the wind demigod, the 3 Windrunner sisters, led by Sylvanas, were controlling the flow of the air in the surrounding atmosphere. A huge wind elemental shield that the Twilight Wyvern couldn't see was preventing the fire elements from escaping. Then, everything fell into place. Heat up, heat up, heat up again. From an ordinary fireball of a few hundred degrees, the surrounding temperature suddenly rose to over 1,000 degrees. At first, the simple-minded Twilight Wyvern didn't react, only thinking that it was an illusion. When the surrounding temperature suddenly jumped from 1,000 degrees to 2,000 degrees, they finally felt that something was wrong. This wasn't normal, this wasn't the temperature that should belong to the mortal world. They began to roar and ask their companions what was going on with their dragon language. But their recklessness and lack of discipline caused them to be in chaos. Because the sky echoed, "Can't even stand this temperature, you're a pig." Such mockery, and even the thick-skinned Twilight Wyvern took the initiative to eat a fireball or 2, declaring that their magic resistance was high enough. When they found that in just a few seconds, the temperature soared to 3,000 degrees, the Twilight Wyverns finally panicked. They asked their leader, Valerian and Serenarian, one after another. But these 2 guys were also weirdos. Valerian and Serenarian, who had miraculously grown up, were supposed to serve as role models for the new generation of Twilight Wyverns, leading their offspring to devour the life of Azeroth. However, they always wasted their unparalleled power on fighting and quarreling. One said to turn around and run, the other said to continue forward. It was in such a quarrel that the Twilight Wyverns completely lost their last chance to escape. Boom! From a distance, Naxxramas looked like a terrifying main cannon with a diameter of more than 1 kilometer, powerful enough to destroy the world. This was the result of the 3 Queen Sylvanas sisters' efforts to use the wind element to make elemental guidance. When a huge amount of fire elements accumulated and exploded, Queen Sylvanas let the fire elements pour towards the west side of the Twilight Wyverns. It looked like a huge, short-barreled gun had fired towards the west. It was just that the power was comparable to a mushroom cloud. Even the initiators of the explosion, the Alliance soldiers, the fire demons, and the fire elemental creatures themselves were a little unsure that this explosion was their own masterpiece. The entire Alliance fleet was silent for a full 3 seconds before bursting into thunderous cheers. Ha! You're dead. I think they're all dead. This is what you get for looking down on us mortals. Many Alliance soldiers took off their helmets and hats and threw them into the air. Well, forget about the hats. The helmets hit a lot of people when they fell due to gravity. This was a man-made fiery hell. They were dealing with the dragons at the top of the food chain on this planet. Of course, this could also be seen as a joint attack by the fire and wind elementals against the Twilight Wyverns. In fact, Duque did not directly attack, and Queen Sylvanas' attack was the icing on the cake. Duque believed that even if Queen Sylvanas did not attack, the result would be quite glorious. Just to be on the safe side, they did not want the fire elements to flow back and blow back to Naxxramas and the flying battleship, so the 3 Windrunner sisters attacked. Chapter 1858. The result of the battle was glorious. This attack, which could be described as strangling or incinerating, lasted for a full 10 breaths in the air. If this was a classic aerial battle between dragons, there would probably be a rain of dirty blood, dragon scales, dragon skin, body parts, and organs that should have been priceless. Unfortunately, there was none. Only a small group of Twilight WMs with the strongest magic resistance could withstand the ultra-high temperature flames with their Twilight domain. The Twilight realm wasn't omnipotent. When the energy transmitted exceeded the limit of what one could withstand, an even more exaggerated explosion would occur. From start to finish, the energy burst out from every organ of the Twilight Dragon that could store energy, forming a larger second explosion. It looked more like a chain explosion. The lucky ones were directly swallowed by the fire elements and turned into burnt chickens, falling from the sky. The unlucky bastard had unluckily activated the Twilight domain in time and absorbed too much energy. As a result, he had been blown up and died without a complete corpse. Everyone who witnessed this scene was stunned, be it the Alliance who led the battle or the Green Dragon Army who were just bystanders. The dazzling flames didn't last long, and the death realm of fire quickly dissipated after losing its support. The Twilight Dragon was still wandering in the air like a wandering ghost, not knowing what to do. Now, there were only 3 to 5 of them left. The charcoal-like Verona and Serenarian were completely stunned. After coming back to their senses, they continued to fight among themselves. "It's all your fault. I said that we wouldn't have to die if we retreated. It's all your fault. We should have just charged forward." The 2 Twilight Dragon leaders were like idiots trying to drag each other down. They didn't realize that the Green Dragon Army had split up behind them. The main force had already started to fly back, but Isra and a few ancient green dragons started to climb rapidly and dive down. What a perfect timing! Isra glanced at the black figure that was diving down from the northeast at about the same height as her. Onyxia might not be good at fighting enemies head-on, but when it came to bullying noobs, no one was better than her. When Variona and Serenarian abandoned her and stopped chasing, she didn't pursue them. Instead, she followed Duque's theory of aerial combat and pursued height. Diving down from a high place was always easier than climbing up from a low place, and it was also more powerful. As a dragon aspect that controlled a portion of the fire elemental world's elements, Onyxia only needed a single thought for the fire elemental elements around her to follow her as she dove down at high speed. The fire elemental elements that had already begun to dissipate were sucked into her body at a speed faster than her dive. Her true form was that of a black dragon. From afar, Onyxia looked like a huge red dragon, drawing a cone-shaped formation of flames in the air. When she swooped down at high speed, she actually pulled out a long line of fire that resembled the tail of a comet. It looked as if it had already split the entire sky. The ferocious attack startled Valriona and Cenarion. The 2 Twilight Dragons, who had been dragging each other down, did something extremely stupid. Seeing that they couldn't dodge Onyxia's attack no matter how fast they accelerated, they actually tried to use each other's bodies to block the Black Dragon's first attack. One should not be afraid of a godlike enemy, but a pig-like teammate. Onyxia might look like she was going all out, but she actually cherished her life more than anyone else. Unfortunately, the Twilight Dragons didn't know that. When she reached the peak of her speed, a huge amount of fire elemental elements gathered in front of her dragon's head. It looked like a fire spear extending from the Black Dragon's head. Bam! Bam! This was the second consecutive attack that shook the atmosphere. Onyxia's larger body crashed into the middle of the 2 Twilight Dragons who seemed to be dancing a pas de deux. If one of the dragons had the guts to extend its claws and give Onyxia a vicious blow, it might have ended in a lose-lose situation. However, both Valriona and Cenarion's reaction at the last moment was to run. They only opened up half of their Twilight domain to defend themselves, but they were also afraid that they would absorb too much fire elemental elements and blow themselves up. That was hilarious. If Onyxia had split the fire elemental elements she brought with her into 2, either of them would have been able to handle it. But how could the Black Dragon, who was an expert at bullying noobs, give them the chance to do so? Don't even think about escaping. Onyxia, who had not used her full strength in the first place, did a rather damaging thing. She did split the power in her body into two, but all the fire elemental elements were aimed at Cenarion while she pounced at Valriona. According to Duke's secret instructions when he was training the dragon, plus her own observations, she was very sure that the two of them would never cover for each other. As expected, Cenarion's first reaction was to run when he saw the overwhelming amount of high-purity fire elemental elements coming at him. But Valriona's first reaction was to face it angrily. The energy theory of aerial combat was fully validated at this moment. Xianxia, who was faster, flew in a small arc and easily dodged Valriona's clumsy bite, as well as her follow-up claw attack. Then, the black dragon used the inertia from the high-speed dive to make an emergency hover with her wings and swung her thick and long tail in a perfect semicircle, hitting Valriona's right arm hard. It was better to break one than to injure 10 fingers. She learned how Duque treated her in the past and used it to deal with her enemies. The force of a dragon aspect's attack, coupled with the huge inertia from the acceleration of gravity, was more than 100 tons. It was a blow that could even shatter a mountain. Valriona let out the most miserable scream since the start of the battle. Not only her right arm, but half of her body, including her right arm and chest, was blasted into pieces. The sharp spikes on the black dragon's meteor hammer-like tail even tore a few pieces of Valriona's lung tissue out. She tried to retaliate in pain and anger, but the black dragon dodged her attack. This time, Xianxia was very patient. Her larger dragon body circled Valriona in the air and attacked more agilely. Almost every time, she would grab the collapsed right side of Valriona's body to attack, constantly increasing the damage. Victory was only a matter of time. Cenarion, on the other hand, had to expand his twilight domain to the maximum after taking all the fire elemental attacks from Xianxia. He would either overexert himself or be seriously injured by the second flame bombardment. He obviously chose the former. Chapter 1859. Cenarion was about to run away. Unfortunately, he was discovered by Nisario. The terrifying wings of death roared, and Cenarion had no choice but to turn around and rush back to the Alliance fleet. The Alliance fleet was in a panic. Be it the new cannonballs or the fire elemental elite's flame attacks, the limited counterattacks could not cause fatal damage to a demigod dragon commander. Even if this was a short-lived demigod dragon that had forcibly increased its strength. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. Hood is about to be attacked head-on by the enemy's dragon commander. Please advise. The communications soldier broke out in a cold sweat. Not to mention the communications girl on the hood, even the captain was sweating. The scientific creations of humans and dwarves could not compare to dragons in terms of mobility. They could not beat it, nor could they run away. If they got close, they would die. However, in the communication mirror, the communications girl seemed to be listening to something. Then, she immediately turned her head and smiled. Sir Commander said, "It's fine." Duque said it's fine? Then it should be fine. Duque had been in control of the Alliance for more than 10 years. Whether it was his demigod status or his prestige, they had reached the pinnacle. If he said it was fine, it should be fine. Even though everyone was nervous, even though everyone's palms were sweating, they still chose to believe in Duque and did nothing. There were no suitable targets within range. Firing indiscriminately would be a waste. The Alliance soldiers on the hood quietly waited for the verdict to come. In the eyes of others, a tragedy was about to happen. Suddenly, something that looked like a cloud or mist was torn apart, and a huge green dragon pounced from the left. Among the dragons, there was only one green dragon that had such a majestic and elegant appearance, the Emerald Dragon King Isra. She did not launch a brutal attack. She merely roared at the top of her voice. Cenarion knelt down. The dragon's face, which had been ferocious and violent because of his boss, calmed down at a speed visible to the naked eye. His gaping mouth also closed, as if he was about to enter the deepest sleep. Several green dragons that were not inferior to him swarmed up. Before Cenarion woke up from his dream, he used the most brutal bite of the dragons to tear the Twilight Dragon apart. But was this a nightmare? If this is a nightmare, let me wake up. At the end of his life, Thanarian could not tell the difference between illusion and reality. He instinctively tried to use the Twilight Domain to absorb the energy around him to repair his body, but Isra was there. A green special domain completely suppressed Serenarian's domain. Just like the difference in strength between demigods, battles between domains were much simpler and more direct. The difference in strength naturally resulted in complete suppression in an instant. The outcome was decided in an instant. One of his green dragons held Cenarian's head in his mouth, ready to bring it back as a trophy. Isra instantly killed the enemy's general, turned around in the air, and even had the time to wave his claws at the officers of the Alliance fleet to show his friendliness. The appearance of this elegant and beautiful Dragon King immediately caused the entire fleet to cheer. The soldiers poked their heads out from behind the cannons, raised their hands high, and waved their arms excitedly. Even the fire elemental creatures led by the fire demon bowed to Isra. The captains of the various warships and the officers in the fortress were also excited to see this scene. Maybe the ancient war 10,000 years ago was like this, where all the races united to fight against evil? I think so. Even Duque, who was sitting in the command center of the fortress, felt like he was in the Return of the Army's war in the game. Isra, I won't let you die this time, Duque muttered softly, but Duque's words were heard by Tyrant. The beautiful high priestess immediately fell into deep thought. As Isra flew at high speed with the last few ancient green dragons and returned to the main battlefield, the battle on Onyxia's side was also over. The Black Dragon Princess took a deep breath and blinded Variona's vision. All the feints were to cover up the sweeping tail of the scorpion-like dragon. This time, Variona, who couldn't dodge in time, was hit in the head. Her entire left skull and left eye collapsed, and her left shoulder was also injured. Normal giant dragons would have died from such injuries, but Variona fully activated the Twilight Domain and even absorbed the frost elements in the air to heal herself. Onyxia followed up with another attack, and the Twilight Dragon finally fell from the sky. Varona fell like a cannonball into the middle of the iceberg on the west side of Dragon's Pine River. The cracked ice spread in all directions and immediately caused an avalanche. This wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that a terrifying wave suddenly surged out of Dragon's Pine River. This sudden wave instantly engulfed the heavily injured Variona. She still wanted to struggle, but a huge anchor was thrown out from the wave and strangely hooked onto her neck. In the next second, an irresistible force came from the rising wave. She screamed as she saw several gigantic aquatic monsters that seemed to be grinning sinisterly in the middle of the huge waves. Hee. That's right, after dealing with Ratio, Tidewalker Marogri and the others had their eyes on a new prey. Having just obtained new power, they couldn't wait to show their value to their master. The fate of Majordomo Executus had already told them that although Duque needed a Majordomo to take care of his vast territory, he also needed powerful beings who could help him charge and break through enemy lines. At first, these powerful aquatic beings didn't want their queen to rely on Duque. However, as Duque gradually revealed his strength and future, and when they obtained a share of the water elemental realm, the concept of Master's Master is our true master began to be deeply imprinted in their hearts. When Variona was dragged into the water, Onyxia turned around and flew towards the main battlefield. Good job, Onyxia. In the soul communication, Duque was not stingy with his praise. Master, should I train a dragon when I come back? Is this guy addicted to it? Duque complained in his heart, but he said, wait until you have the courage to face your parents. The fierce battle in the northern sky of Dragonsleep Temple was still going on. Other than Kalegos being beaten like a dog by the tail of the larger Deathwing and falling down, the Dragonsleep Coalition army didn't lose any of their main dragons. Although she was stalling for time, Alexstrasza felt that it was unreal and ridiculous. Why did she feel that her betrayed brother was a little weak? Chapter 1860. Indeed, the wing of death that appeared in the north of the Long Sleep Temple had the most terrifying body. After integrating with the ancient progenitor WM Gallicran's biological cells, his body size had skyrocketed to more than 500 meters. The core of his body was also 200 meters long and more than 100 meters wide. This was no different from a conjoined skyscraper of 70 to 80 stories flying around in everyone's field of vision. That kind of earth-shattering brute force was not something any mortal creature could resist. This was no longer a matter of health. It was almost impossible to break through his defense. The thick layer of acid that wrapped around his body was simply his second layer of dragon skin. An ordinary WM's dragon breath would at most evaporate into a cloud of acid mist. It could not even touch his body. They had to be even more careful not to choke on the acid mist when they were downwind. It had been confirmed that if a young dragon inhaled a large amount of acid droplets, its respiratory tract would rot and it would die directly. Only dragons of the ancient WRM level could hurt the wing of death. Unfortunately, it was only superficial injuries that did not affect the muscles and bones. The ancient blue dragon Irigos had boldly wrapped his dragon body with frost elements and sealed a large area of the acid on Nisario's body with frost dragon breath. He then rushed over to break the acid and gave Nisario's body a direct hit with a magic bomb. It had indeed caused a huge wound that was big enough to stuff a small villa. Who knew that the acid that surged from other parts of Nisario's body would almost bury him? The wound that was created was also filled up by the crazily proliferating dragon-like biological tissue in a mere 10 breaths. There were even more. On that dragon's body, there were a few dragon legs and dragon claws of the ordinary WM level. It looked very disgusting. Your Majesty, this will never end. The ancient red dragon Gahiran reminded his queen. No. As a red dragon, have you forgotten the true meaning of life? The essence of life is the consumption of energy. The recovery of any limb is bound to consume vitality, which is some kind of special energy. Nisario's recovery power is definitely not infinite. Alexstrasza did not say the second half of the sentence. This Nisario seemed a bit retarded. With such a huge body and such vitality and defense, no one would be able to do anything to him in a short period of time. If he didn't care and charged over, forcefully destroying the Dragon Slumber Shrine, even if the new 5 color guardian dragons gathered here, it would be difficult to stop his destruction. However, Darkwing's single-minded pursuit of Alexstrasza gave her the opportunity to toy with her old rival. A sweep of the dragon's tail would produce a terrifying wind pressure equivalent to the collapse of a 100-story building. Ordinary creatures could only watch helplessly as they died. As a dragon aspect that had been dedicated to protecting the planet for the past 25,000 years and had rich combat experience, Alexstrasza's speed might not be as fast as lightning, but it was still rather fast. She could even use the wind pressure from Nisario's tail to speed up her flight. It looked dangerous, but it was actually as stable as a dog. Basically, she led the ancient WRMs of the red, blue, and bronze WRMs to fight Neltharion, while the rest of the WRMs could only watch from the sidelines. After receiving the news that Krasus's Ruby Jade Sanctum had been attacked, she still had the spare time to send a few ancient WRMs back with a small number of WRMs to hold the fort when the Twilight Dragons were pulled away. The real battle was between the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu and the Undead Dragon Queen Sinestra. The living Sinestra couldn't be compared to a real Dragon King. At best, she was just a strong female dragon, strong enough to withstand Nisario's love without dying. Nisario was very wild when he was having sex. The 3 deep scars on Sinestra's dragon chest that looked like ravines were the scars left behind by her temporary partner back then. Neltharion almost killed her, and also caused the deaths of 2 dragons. Later, she turned into a dragon scientist and wanted to develop a new breed of WRMs to kill Nisario. Unfortunately, after being killed by the Twilight Dragon, she was rescued by Nisario and listened to him again. Perhaps this was the unique sadomasochism of the Black WRMs. According to history, Sinestra would be quite weak at the start of the battle because she had played the Superman game with Darkwing and nursed the Twilight WRM whelps. Without half a life, her attack power would be greatly reduced. There was no such problem in this life. It would be more accurate to say that Neltharion was now more like an oversized battery for Sinestra to squander. Onyxia had the famous deep breath, and her powerful dragon breath naturally came from her mother. Sinestra's flame breath was a full-screen attack in the eyes of mortals. Other dragon breaths were cone-shaped, but hers was a torrent of flames. The raging sea of fire, even in the air, was like a terrifying moving wall of fire with the WMs as the standard. The ancient WMs would howl if they were hit. What was really amazing was her twilight attack skills. A normal WM wouldn't be able to play so many tricks, but the twilight energy, which was based on shadow energy, allowed Sinestra to play with all sorts of tricks. Flame breath forcefully baked the sand on Nozdormu's body, making it even more dry and vulnerable to cracking. Hundreds of twilight shockwaves flew everywhere. Ordinary adult WMs would be killed instantly if they came into contact with one. The disgusting thing was that these shockwaves weren't really out of her control. They weakened and dissipated on their own after being fired. These twilight energy balls would hover in midair according to her will and connect in 2s and 3s. Between two twilight energy balls, there would also be twilight cutting rays. If one accidentally touched them, a huge amount of twilight energy would surge into one's body. Not to mention the ancient WMs. Even Nozdormu had a small finger cut off by the twilight rays if he wasn't careful. Of course, Nozdormu was more like an illusory spiritual energy projection. His dragon body was just an existence that had gathered a large amount of sand and materialized. As long as they couldn't attack the timeline and pull out his body, destroying his dragon body 10,000 times or 100 million times would be useless. But it didn't look good. A clear beam of twilight energy shot out from the huge wings of death and poured into Sinestra's body, allowing her to go all out. After the initial test, hundreds of twilight energy bullets poured into Nozdormu's body every second. As a dimensional dragon king that could interfere with time and history, Nozdormu's body was also a fortress. After his power of time and space started to show, Sinestra felt that her movements had become much slower. Not only her speed, but even her thoughts had started to stagnate. Nozdormu's huge sand WM's body was like a stimulant and kept increasing its speed under the effect of haste. Unfortunately, it was more like they couldn't do anything to each other. Chapter 1861. At this moment, as if he had finally woken up, Nisario's entire body shuddered as if he had just peed himself. He suddenly roared, "It's time to destroy Dragon's Slumber Temple." Amazing! Of all times, why did he have to think of it when Isra had yet to return and Nozdormu was being held back? If it was the sinister and cunning Black Dragon King of the past, Alexstrasza would definitely not have taken it so lightly. However, Nisario, who had increased in size and strength but was obviously in a frenzied state, made the queen unknowingly numb and careless. "Stop him!" Under the Red Dragon Queen's command, dozens of ancient dragons bit the bullet and launched a fierce attack. There were many casualties, but the effect was minimal. They risked their lives to spit dragon's breath on Nisario's mountainous body. Those with superb flying skills and good luck were able to complete the dragon race's unique bombing in an extremely thrilling manner, and then quickly climb up to avoid Nisario's counterattack. The unlucky ones, such as the ancient blue dragons Cadrigos and Borregos, were slapped to death on the spot. Or, if he was not careful, he would be swallowed by the limbs of the wings of death, just like Karastad's. The moment he was eaten, Alexstrasza felt that Nisario's aura had increased slightly. "Titan! What kind of monster is that?" The queen shouted with a hint of sorrow. A total of 5 ancient dragons lost their lives in an instant because of her command. This loss even surpassed the ancient war with the devils 10,000 years ago. At least in the ancient war, the lives of ancient dragons were not so worthless. Without a Void Lord, ordinary devils could not take down the heads of ancient dragons. These were 5 primordial dragons that had made a name for themselves. Now that the dragon clan was on the decline, any ancient giant dragon was an existence that guarded a region. One had to know that even the most prosperous red dragons in Dragonding only had more than 30 ancient dragons. The blue dragon race, which was suffering, only had more than 10. Alexstrasza's dragon heart was about to die from the pain of losing 5 ancient dragons at once. She would probably be sad for a long time after this battle. After absorbing the 3 ancient WMs, Neltharion's dragon body had obviously expanded a little. He laughed wildly with abandon, and just like that he rolled into the magical protection array area of the Dragon Sleep Shrine, almost like a meatball. The Dragon Sleeping Temple's magical defense was undoubtedly the best, but the strongest fortresses were often breached from the inside. As the designated guardians of the Titans, the dragon aspects had the right to use the Dragon Sleep Temple, but they were not the creators of the Dragon Sleep Temple. After Nesario's betrayal, the other 4 Dragon Kings tried their best to modify the defense system of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, but this effort was more like a temporary solution. It couldn't be helped. The wise Titan had thought of many things and many situations, but he had never thought that the Guardians and Dragon aspects, who had been instilled with the concept of absolute loyalty, would actually be brainwashed into rebelling. This has led to many tragedies. For example, Neltharion and the Long Sleep Shrine. Like when Lorcan betrayed O'Dowell. The only problem was that the Titans were not allowed to fly directly to the highest level of the Dragon Slumber Shrine in order to maintain the respect of the dragon race. Before getting close to the Dragon Slumber Shrine, they could only fly to the same height as the lower level, which forced the oversized wings of death to run on the ground. Even so, Neltharion, who was like an inflated balloon, was rampaging through the Dragon Slumber Shrine, as if he had entered a realm without dragons. Only a few magical defense measures really worked and launched attacks against him. Most of the protective facilities were silent, and several spatial barriers even opened on their own after sensing Neltharion's soul. It was not that there were no brave Dragonians or half-Dragonians who stepped forward in an attempt to stop him, but unfortunately, it was more like sending themselves to their deaths. With a stomp, the constantly proliferating dragon limbs pulled these brave people into Neltharion's body and forcibly swallowed them into a part of the wings of death. Alexstrasza tried to harass him from behind, but it was not very effective. Her flame of purification could not hurt Neltharion's foundation. She had tried, and at most, she could hurt the biological tissues 20 meters below the surface of his body. Any deeper and she was powerless. Sin. It's all my sin. The Red Dragon Queen, who had always been brave and determined, was almost crying. At this moment, Duque's message came. Actually, I think you can trust me a little more. I'm the guardian of Azeroth, after all, although it was not decided by the Titans. Duque, you have a way? As long as you no longer regard dealing with Neltharion as an internal affair of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, and allow me to bring powerhouses in. Duque's voice was sonorous and resolute. All right. At this point they had already lost all face. Were they going to watch the crystallization of the Pentashade dragons, the Dragon Slumber Shrine that had been passed down for 25,000 years, be destroyed by a traitor? An entry telekinesis message was sent over. Almost at the same time, 4 large portals that were 15 stories high suddenly opened in front of Neltharion. 4 burly giants stepped out from inside. It's them. Why didn't I think of it? Alexstrasza was also confused by her concern. Compared to Duque, it was more justifiable for Archivon's 4 guardians to enter the Dragon Slumber Shrine. After all, they were all Titans. Although the 4 of them were very strong, could they deal with Neltharion, who was so huge? The 4 great guardians were 10 stories tall. To mortals, they were definitely huge beings. Tragically, size was relative. Compared to Neltharion, whose torso was 200 meters long and was basically a moving mountain, a 30-meter-tall body was really not enough. They were just a few miserable dwarves. Right at this time, Duke's figure suddenly appeared in a flash. He stood on the shoulder of Rock Guardian Archon. A second later, there were 3 more existences that exuded an extremely powerful aura. On the shoulder of Storm Guardian Emeron was Sylvanas. On the shoulder of Flame Guardian Coron was Kale. On the shoulder of Frost Guardian Turawan was Vashj. Emeron. Requesting the advent of the Storm Guardian shouted and raised his arms high. Suddenly, 2 openings that looked like holes appeared in his palms. It was not that there were holes in his palms, but that he had completely opened the interface of his elemental circuit. Sylvanas, in the name of the master of the wind god throne, I agree to your request. Queen Sylvanas's brilliant blonde hair suddenly rose high in the wind, like a golden peacock proudly spreading its tail. The atmosphere suddenly trembled violently, and the shadow of the wind god throne appeared in the void above the dragon slumber shrine. A powerful tornado that was enough to wrap the entire dragon slumber shrine rolled up, but in just 3 seconds, all the wind elements, under the guidance of Queen Sylvanas, poured into Emerald's body. Chapter 1862. Just like back then, Magni could absorb earth elements to expand his body to the size of Alcavan. Now, the half-elemental, half-living Amaran was doing the same thing. If it was in the past, there wouldn't have been so much pure and highly concentrated wind elements to support his enlarged body. But after Queen Sylvanas grasped the wind elemental realm, everything was different. Amaran's body expanded like an inflated balloon. In less than 3 seconds, he had become a 100-meter-tall giant, at least 3 times larger than his original size. If he was a human, he would definitely feel uncomfortable because of the changes in his body structure. The Watcher himself was not a living being in the standard sense. Not only his body, even the clothes and equipment on his body were mostly made of elements. And as a half-elemental life form, there was no discomfort after becoming bigger, as long as the body proportion was normal. Oh 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 oh! Amaran let out a wild and heroic roar. Not only him, but the 2 Watchers, Corellon and Turawan, were also enjoying the same treatment. The massive injection of fire and frost elements made them also become giants of Imeron's level. A moment ago, in front of Nesario, who had become incomparably huge after absorbing Galakran's remains, the 3 giants were just dwarfs. 10 seconds later, they had become behemoths strong enough to threaten Nesario. Even though the main trunk of the wings was more than 200 meters long, the dragon race had long tails and necks. Even if the necks were shorter because of Galakran's genes, the main trunk of the wings was still more than 120 meters long. Both sides had become terrifying existences of the same weight class. The elemental masters who were originally standing on the 3 quickly left because they were not the main characters next. Come on! The 3 giants let out a provocative roar in unison. Roar, the wings roared in response. It swatted at Imeron's head, but the Storm Watcher showed agility that was not commensurate with his size. He actually did a front somersault, dodged the attack, and stepped on Nesario's left wing. The slightly slow Turawan was caught by the right claw of the wings, and the biological corrosion that the 4-colored dragons feared hit a wall on Turawan's body. Those dragon limbs that had grown out were immediately frozen when they touched Turawan's body. The freezing air at absolute zero instantly stopped the reproduction of their cells. The most important component of a cell was water. When water turned into ice and its volume increased, it would break the cell wall and membrane, causing the cell to die. The others only saw that the growing limbs on Darkwing's body seemed to have met their nemesis. They actually struggled to retreat, as if they didn't want the plague to spread to their bodies. It was a bit too late. Large amounts of limbs were completely frozen and then disintegrated into beautiful ice crystal fragments. The real main attacker was the Flame Warden, Cultivate. He took huge steps that shook the world and rushed to the side of Wings, giving Wings a hard shoulder bump. Bang! Roar! Not only did Corellon knock the black dragon over, but the raging fire elements on its body also evaporated a large amount of acid on the dragon's body. Deathwing let out a thunderous cry of pain. This was the first time he had been knocked over since the start of the battle. He lay on his side on the ground with his 4 limbs in the air. As a former dragon aspect of the combat faction, Wing was not that easy to kill. When the other 2 wardens wanted to go up and take advantage of the situation, he raised his limbs and kicked them away. Arkan, the only warden who did not go up, looked a little lonely. It couldn't be helped. His 3 good brothers had a place to play, and he could only stay here and watch the show. Duque joked, "Sorry, I haven't controlled the Deep Rock continent yet." Arc Avon perked up. "It's okay. I believe it's only a matter of time." At this time, Alexstrasza landed next to Archaven. Duque, this is indeed a good idea, but I don't think the three of them can take down the traitor, Nisario. The queen gritted her teeth a little. Deathwing was too tanky. As long as his body's ability to reproduce was greater than the damage he suffered, he would truly be immortal. There were only two solutions, either interrupt his growth, or inflict damage that exceeded his recovery ability. The queen focused all her attention on Duque. In terms of attack power, perhaps even Moon Goddess Elun's, Starfall, could not compare to Duque, who controlled the two elemental realms of water and fire. Duque shook his head. It's not the time yet. Alexstrasza thought that Duque wanted to accumulate power for the final blow, so she did not pay much attention. This was not what Duque was really concerned about. Beep beep beep. On Duque's retina, the system scanned a lot of data. There was too much abnormal data. He had basically confirmed a fact that overlapped with history. Duque did not do anything. He just snapped his fingers. Snap. A crisp sound rang out. In response to the sound, several wardens stepped out of the huge teleportation doors that had been opened. Traitor! Die! Torim, who had the most burly body, was the first to swing his hammer. A thick thunderbolt that seemed to be able to split the entire Dragon Slumber Temple in half suddenly flashed out of the void. It was filled with the most violent power of thunder in the world. The purple thunderbolt landed directly on Deathwing's head. On the huge dragon's head, all the multiplying dragon-like limbs turned into charcoal and instantly exploded. The heavy bombardment forced Deathwing to lower his proud head. It looked like he had placed his neck on the execution platform. Tie up that traitor. Life Guardian Freya raised her arms high. Several green vines with a diameter of more than 10 meters broke out of the frozen ground in front of the Dragon Slumber Temple and tightly wrapped around the struggling dragon's neck. The third warden, Hodier, appeared. He raised his hands high, and a frost axe that was far larger than his body size took shape in his hands. The ratio between his body and the frost axe was quite exaggerated. It looked like a mouse lifting an elephant. With a thunderous roar, the huge single-edged ice axe had a real master. Frost Guardian Turawan took the terrifying ice axe that Hodier had created. It seemed to be able to split the sky and earth. The axe that symbolized judgment finally fell. Sizzle, it was a strange sound that did not match the scene. The scene seemed to be frozen. Then, like a comic strip, everyone saw that after Nisario's huge snake neck was cut off, he began to roll and twitch in pain on the ground like an earthworm that had been roasted by fire. His dragon head even bit the dragon skeletons that were scattered on the ice field. The sound of bones breaking made one's scalp tingle. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.